The fluorescent lights of Millbrook Public Library hummed their familiar evening song as Elena Mora locked the front doors at exactly 8:45. She had performed this ritual 563 times since moving to Montana 3 years ago. Every movement precise, every gesture measured. Lock the main entrance. Check the children's section windows. Verify the emergency exits. Walk through the stacks one final time, listening for sounds that didn't belong. Old habits, she told herself, just old habits. But habits formed in places where mistakes meant death never truly faded. They just learned to hide beneath the surface of ordinary life, waiting for the moment when survival would demand their return. The October wind carried the scent of early snow as Elena stepped onto Main Street. Millbrook in autumn looked like something from a postcard that promised simple American dreams. White church steeples, red brick storefronts, flags still flying at dusk because people here believed in the symbols even when the reality had grown complicated. Population 4,200, though that number shrank every year as young people fled to cities where futures looked bigger than the Montana sky. Elena pulled her coat tighter and began the 8-block walk to her apartment above the old pharmacy. She varied her route every night, Monday through the residential streets where porch lights created pools of safety, Tuesday past the shuttered grain elevator where shadows gathered thick, Wednesday along the creek bed where the sound of moving water masked footsteps. Tonight was Thursday, the long way home. She moved through this darkness with a fluidity that would have looked casual to any observer. Just a young woman walking home from work, maybe thinking about dinner or the book she'd been reading, or whether the forecasted snow would actually arrive. But her eyes swept the street in controlled arcs. Her ears filtered traffic sounds from human movement. Her body maintained awareness of every doorway, every parked car, every second-story window that offered a firing position. 28 years old, and she had already lived 3 lifetimes. The first as a child in Kabul before the Taliban came. The second as a refugee in a camp where aid workers taught English and hope in equal measures. The third as a soldier in an army that promised her citizenship and gave her purpose, and then asked her to do things that turned out to be lies, dressed in the uniform of necessity. The memorial wall waited at the corner of 5th and Pine. Elena had walked past it 1,000 times and never once allowed herself to truly look. But tonight something pulled at her. Some instinct honed by years of reading terrain and assessing threats. She stopped. 7 names carved into black granite, 7 faces she could still see when she closed her eyes. The official story said training accident, a catastrophic equipment failure during a routine exercise at an undisclosed location. 7 of America's finest, gone in an instant. The kind of tragedy that made senators give speeches about the cost of freedom and then move on to the next news cycle. Sergeant First Class Michael Torres, 29, wife and 2 daughters in North Carolina. Staff Sergeant James Wu, 31. Parents still brought flowers every month, even though they lived in California. Sergeant David Palmer, 27, engaged. Wedding was supposed to be that spring. Corporal Anthony Rodriguez, 24. His mother had tried to visit Elena once. She'd hidden until the woman left. Specialist Marcus Johnson, 22. Kid from Detroit who'd enlisted to escape the streets and found brotherhood instead. Private First Class Christopher Lee, 20, the youngest, still had acne. And at the bottom, added later because at first they'd thought there was nothing left to bury, Sergeant Tyler Mora, 23, brother, friend, the reason Elena had survived Afghanistan and the reason she'd barely survived Syria. She pressed her fingers against Tyler's name. The stone was cold, real, solid proof that he was gone, even though some part of her brain still insisted on treating every crowd for his face. They taught us to count, she thought. Count rounds, count seconds, count bodies. I stopped counting at 7. A car turned onto Pine Street. Elena's hand dropped from the memorial. Her body shifted into ready position before her conscious mind registered the movement. Just Mrs. Patterson in her ancient Buick, heading home from bridge night at the community center. The old woman waved. Elena waved back. Normal, ordinary, safe. She continued walking. Her apartment occupied the 2nd floor of what had once been Montgomery Pharmacy, back when Millbrook had 3 times its current population, and people got their prescriptions filled by men in white coats who knew everyone's name. Now the ground floor sat empty except for the ghosts of a prosperity that had moved on to easier money in easier places. Elena climbed the external stairs, testing each step before putting weight on it. Wooden, exposed, tactically indefensible. But the rent was cheap and the landlord never asked questions, and the second-story windows gave her clear sight lines to the street below. Inside, she performed the same check she'd done every evening for 3 years. Door frame intact, no scratches around the lock, window seals unbroken, kitchen exactly as she'd left it, bathroom clear, bedroom empty except for furniture she could replace in an hour if necessary. The only items of value sat in a fireproof box beneath a loose floorboard. Passport, cash, 3 hard drives encrypted with keys she'd memorized and never written down, and a photograph from before, when she'd still believed that serving meant something pure. She heated soup, mechanical, efficient. Food was fuel and nothing more. While it warmed, she moved through her evening routine. 40 push-ups, 40 sit-ups, breathing exercises learned from an instructor who trained with Tibetan monks before joining Force Recon. Count to 4 breathing in, hold for 7, release for 8. Repeat until the heart rate dropped below 60. Repeat until the dreams about fire and screaming felt far away enough to risk sleep. The soup was tasteless. She ate anyway. At 9:30, her phone buzzed and text message from Sheriff Tom Hendricks. Just checking in. Quiet night. Every night's quiet here, she typed back. That's why I picked it. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, you check your email lately? Army sent something, might want to look. Elena stared at the message. The Army hadn't contacted her in 3 years. Not since the exit interview where a 2-star general had thanked her for her service and suggested that discussing certain operational details would be inadvisable for national security reasons. She'd signed the non-disclosure agreements, accepted the medical discharge, taken the disability checks that arrived monthly for injuries that were classified and therefore officially didn't exist. And in return, she'd been left alone. She opened her laptop. The email sat at the top of her inbox. Subject line, official notification, testimony required. Sender, United States Army Legal Division, Fort Bragg. Her hands didn't shake. 3 years of civilian life hadn't erased that much training. But something cold settled behind her sternum as she clicked. Captain Elena Mora, U.S. Army, retired. You are hereby summoned to provide testimony regarding Operation Ember 7, Syria 2019, at preliminary hearing under Uniform Code of Military Justice, Article 32. Subject, conduct unbecoming and negligent homicide. You are required to appear at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, 14 days from receipt of this notification. Failure to comply may result in additional charges. Contact information follows. Elena read it 3 times, each word a small detonation and a chain reaction she couldn't stop. They wanted her to testify about Syria, about the mission that had killed 7 men and ended her career and left her wandering the American West, looking for a place where she could finally stop running from the weight of what she'd done. Conduct unbecoming, negligent homicide. They were going to blame her. Officially. Put it all on record. The story would be that Captain Elena Mora had made an error in judgment, that her shot had been reckless, that 7 American heroes had died because she'd been too eager or too careless or too whatever narrative made the right people look blameless. She closed the laptop, opened it again, stared at the screen until the words blurred. Syria, 5 years ago, a lifetime ago. She'd been 23 and so certain that what she was doing mattered, that every target she eliminated brought the world one step closer to justice, that the men and women who gave her orders were playing a game with rules and honor and some kind of moral foundation underneath all the necessary darkness. The memories came whether she wanted them or not. They always did at night. Desert heat pressing down like God's own anvil, the special kind of silence that exists right before a shot. Her spotters breathing, her own heart slowing to 40 beats per minute because that's what you did when you needed to be more machine than human. The target in her scope. Intel said high-value ISIS commander. Intel said this was the man coordinating chemical weapons attacks on civilian populations. Intel said taking this shot would save thousands of lives. She'd believed them. She'd always believed them. The trigger pull. Clean. Perfect. Exactly as she'd been trained. 800 meters in a crosswind that required 3 minutes of calculation and a lifetime of instinct. The target dropped. Mission complete. Then the building exploded. Not from her shot, from something else. Something massive and sudden and so bright through her scope that she jerked back. blinded. And when her vision cleared, there was nothing left of the structure where her team had been gathering intelligence. Just fire, just smoke, just the radio screaming with voices of men dying while she lay on a rooftop 800 meters away, unable to do anything but watch. 7 men, 7 brothers, gone in the time it took to blink. The official investigation had taken 6 weeks. She'd sat through debriefings where men with stars on their shoulders asked the same questions in different ways. Had she verified the target properly? Had she followed engagement protocols? Had she considered that her shot might trigger secondary explosions? The implication was clear. They needed someone to carry the weight, someone expendable. And a 23-year-old female sniper with a refugee background made for easier paperwork than admitting that American intelligence had put 7 special operators in a building someone else had decided to destroy. In the end, they'd called it classified, sealed the records, told her to sign the NDAs and accept the medical discharge and go find somewhere quiet to heal from wounds they couldn't acknowledge existed. And she'd been too tired and too broken to fight. But now they wanted to revisit it, wanted to put it on official record, wanted to make sure that when historians wrote about Syria, if they ever did, the story would say that Captain Mora's negligence killed 7 heroes. Elena stood, paced the apartment, 3 steps to the window, 4 steps to the door. The space suddenly felt smaller than the hide sites she'd occupied for days at a time, barely moving, barely breathing, waiting for targets that sometimes never came. Her phone buzzed again. "Hendricks, you okay?" She didn't respond, couldn't find words that wouldn't sound like weakness. The night stretched long. Elena didn't sleep. Instead, she sat by the window and watched the empty street and tried not to think about the faces on the memorial wall, about Tyler's laugh, about the promise she'd made him the night before that mission. "Nothing's gonna happen," she'd said. "I'll be 800 meters away, safest seat in the house." At 4:45 in the morning, she gave up on sleep entirely. Rose, changed into workout clothes, began the routine that had kept her sane for 3 years. Push-ups until her arms shook, sit-ups until her core burned, then the breathing exercises, the meditation techniques, the systematic shutdown of emotional response in favor of tactical assessment. The Army wanted her at Fort Bragg in 14 days. She could go, she could testify, she could sit in a room full of officers and lawyers and explain how she'd done everything right and 7 men had died anyway. She could watch them write it into the record, could accept whatever judgment they had already decided on before she walked through the door. Or she could run, disappear into the American landscape. She had the skills, had the cash, had the documents. 3 years in Millbrook was already longer than she'd planned to stay anywhere. Maybe it was time to find a new town, a new name, a new story about who Elena Mora had been before the war took everything that mattered. The sun rose at 6:12. Elena watched the light spread across the eastern mountains. Montana in October painted the world in colors she'd never seen in Afghanistan or Syria. Gold and amber and rust. The kind of beauty that made you believe in redemption right up until you remembered that beauty didn't absolve sin. At 7:15, she walked to the library, opened the doors, shelved the returned books, helped Mrs. Patterson find a large print mystery, read to the children who came for Thursday morning's story hour, pretended that the world was simple and good and that the stories always ended with the right people winning. Sheriff Hendricks arrived at 11:30. He moved with the careful deliberation of a man whose body had betrayed him. The limp was slight but permanent. Right leg, below the knee. Prosthetic, though he wore jeans loose enough that most people never noticed. Syria had taken his leg the same day it took Elena's brothers. Tom Hendricks was 45 years old and looked 60. That's what combat did. It aged you in ways that had nothing to do with years. He'd been force recon before transferring to Rangers, then Syria, then medical retirement, then back home to Montana, where he'd grown up, taking the sheriff job because small towns didn't ask too many questions about gaps in your resume. He and Elena had an understanding. They didn't talk about before, didn't acknowledge the shared nightmares, didn't examine the invisible threads that connected 2 people who'd survived the same catastrophe. But he checked on her, and she let him, because somewhere beneath all the armor they'd both built, there was still enough humanity left to recognize that being alone and being isolated weren't the same thing. Tom set a coffee on the circulation desk. Black, no sugar. The way she'd drunk it in hide sites where cream meant extra weight and sugar meant packets that rustled and gave away your position. You get the email, he asked? Elena nodded. You gonna go? She studied his face. Weathered, lined. The face of a man who'd seen too much and survived anyway. Tom had been 20 meters from the building when it exploded, blown clear by the blast wave. Woke up 3 days later in a field hospital, missing part of his leg and most of his hearing. The doctor said he was lucky. He'd never agreed. I don't know, she said. They're gonna scapegoat you. You know that, right? Pin the whole thing on the one person who can't fight back. What would you do? Tom was quiet for a long moment. Outside the library windows, Millbrook carried on its ordinary business. People buying groceries, walking dogs, living lives that had never included the choice between testifying about war crimes and disappearing forever. I'd want to know why now, he said finally. Why after 5 years of silence, they suddenly want to drag this back up. What changed? Who's pushing for this? Because in my experience, the military doesn't revisit closed files unless someone important needs a story to change. Elena hadn't considered that angle. She'd been so focused on the personal threat that she'd missed the tactical question. Tom was right. The Army didn't waste resources on old operations, not without cause. I need to make some calls, she said. Be careful who you trust. Whoever's behind this has enough juice to reopen a classified file. That's not some captain with a grudge. That's flag officer level. Tom left. The afternoon passed in its usual rhythms. Elena processed returns, updated the catalog, answered questions about library card renewals, and when the new Patterson thriller would arrive. Normal, ordinary. The kind of day that used to bore her and now felt precious because it meant she was still alive to experience boredom. At closing time, she locked up and walked home the long way. Thursday route, along the creek bed where water sounds covered footsteps. Through the park where she could see approaching vehicles from 200 meters. Past the memorial wall where 7 names waited in the gathering dark. She didn't stop tonight. Couldn't bear to read those names again, knowing what might be coming. Her apartment felt smaller than ever. Elena sat at the kitchen table and opened her laptop. The email was still there, still official, still demanding her presence at a hearing that would turn her from survivor to scapegoat. She clicked through to her encrypted email, the one she'd promised herself she'd never use again, logged in with credentials she'd memorized and never written down. The inbox was empty except for automated security notifications. No one had contacted her through this channel in 3 years. No one knew she still monitored it. Elena composed a message, sent it to an address that might not even be active anymore. Waited. 30 minutes later, a response arrived. Just 2 words. Call me. She used the burner phone from the fireproof box, the one she'd bought with cash and activated under a name that didn't exist. 3 rings. Then a voice she hadn't heard in 3 years. Elena, I was wondering when you'd reach out. Colonel Richard Jameson, 62 years old, Vietnam veteran, 2 tours in the jungle when he was younger than Elena was now, then Gulf War, then Afghanistan, then Syria, where he'd been the commanding officer of Operation Ember 7, the man who'd recruited her, trained her, turned her into one of the most effective snipers in the regiment, and then watched everything burn. You got the summons too? She asked. 2 days ago. They want me to testify about your performance evaluation, whether I had concerns about your judgment, whether I should have pulled you from the mission. Elena's jaw tightened. And what are you going to say? The truth, that you were the best operator I ever trained, that your shot was clean and correct based on the intelligence you were given, that what happened afterward had nothing to do with your actions. They won't want to hear that. No, they won't. Which is why we need to talk about what's really happening here. Jameson's voice carried weight even through encrypted phone lines. The authority of a man who'd spent 40 years in uniform and learned to read the political currents that killed more careers than enemy fire ever did. Someone's trying to bury this, he continued. And they've decided you make better burial material than the truth. Who? I don't know yet, but I'm working on it. In the meantime, you need to be careful. Don't talk to anyone from the Army. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to any preliminary interviews. They'll use everything you say to build their case. What case? I've followed every protocol, did exactly what I was trained to do. Elena, listen to me. This isn't about what you did. This is about what someone needs the story to be. And right now, they need the story to be that a young captain made a mistake and 7 good men paid the price. Clean, simple, No uncomfortable questions about who approved the mission or why intelligence was so catastrophically wrong. Silence stretched between them. In the background, Elena could hear wind. Jameson was outside somewhere, probably at his ranch in Idaho, the place he'd retreated to after Syria. After the medals and commendations and carefully worded retirement ceremony that everyone understood was forced. "I'm not going to let them do this to you," Jameson said. "You have my word." "Your word against the Pentagon," she replied. "I've been fighting the Pentagon since before you were born, kid. I've got a few tricks left." They said their goodbyes. Elena sat in the dark apartment and tried to believe that Jameson could actually help, that someone with enough rank and history and stubborn integrity could stand between her and the institutional machinery designed to protect itself at any cost. But belief required hope, and hope had died in Syria along with 7 men who trusted her to keep them safe. The hours crawled past midnight. Elena lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. It never did when the memories took hold. So she let them play, let herself remember. Tyler at 19, fresh out of basic training, so proud of his uniform he'd worn it home on leave, even though she'd told him real soldiers traveled in civilian clothes. Big, stupid grin, too much confidence. That particular flavor of young male immortality that made boys volunteer for the hardest schools and the most dangerous missions. He'd followed her into the military, followed her to Rangers, followed her all the way to Syria because keeping his big sister safe was more important than his own survival. And she'd let him. Had actually felt pride that they'd served together, had believed that her skills and his dedication would be enough to get them both home. The last conversation played in her head like a recording. Night before the mission, sitting on ammo crates outside the TOC while the desert cooled and stars emerged in numbers that city people never saw. "Sis," Tyler had said, "if anything happens." "Nothing's gonna happen," she'd interrupted. "I'll be 800 meters away, safest seat in the house." "Yeah, but if it does, tell Mom and Dad I did good." "They're dead, Tyler, you know that." "Then tell their ghosts." They'd laughed, both of them. Because what else could you do with grief that old and permanent? Their parents had died in Kabul when Elena was 12 and Tyler was 8, killed by people who hated what they represented, killed for the crime of helping American soldiers. And in dying, they'd set their children on a path that led inevitably to other deserts, other wars, other people who would die for reasons that seemed important right up until they didn't. Elena rolled over, pressed her face into the pillow, tried to suffocate the memories, but they kept coming. The explosion, fire blooming in her scope, radio screaming, her own voice calling for Tyler, calling for anyone, getting nothing back but static and the sounds of a building collapsing on top of the men she'd sworn to protect. The search afterward, days spent in the ruins, sifting through debris that was too contaminated to touch without hazmat gear, finding pieces, dog tags, bits of equipment, nothing whole. Nothing that could be sent home to families who deserve better than a flag and condolences and the official lie about training accidents. Tyler's body had been unrecoverable. That's what they'd told her. The chemical contamination was too severe. They'd done dental record identification from fragments, given her a closed casket at Arlington, let her stand there in dress uniform while they played taps and folded a flag over wood and brass that contained nothing of her brother except the idea of him. She'd believe them. Had to believe them, because the alternative was madness. At 3:47 in the morning, Elena's phone lit up. Text message from an unknown number. Just coordinates? Nothing else. She stared at the screen. Latitude and longitude, somewhere in Idaho based on the numbers. Maybe 200 miles north of where Jameson's ranch was supposed to be. Another message arrived. This one with an attachment. Video file. Elena hesitated. Unknown number. Unsolicited video. Every security protocol she'd ever learned screamed trap, but curiosity was its own kind of tactical necessity. You couldn't assess a threat without understanding its nature. She downloaded the file to an isolated virtual machine, opened it. The video was dark, poor quality, shot on a phone probably. It showed a concrete room, Cold War-era construction, bunker maybe, and in the center, tied to a chair, was Colonel Richard Jameson. He'd been beaten. Not recently. Days ago, based on the bruising. His right eye was swollen shut. Blood crusted his lip. But he was alive, alert, staring directly at the camera with the kind of defiant hatred that suggested he hadn't broken yet. A voice spoke off camera, male, accent, Russian maybe, or one of the former Soviet states. The English was good but carried the weight of a second language learned late. Colonel Jameson has information we require. He has been uncooperative. Perhaps he will be more forthcoming if he knows his protege is watching. The camera shifted, focused on Jameson's face. "Tell her," the voice commanded. "Tell Captain Mora what really happened in Syria." Jameson said nothing, just stared at the camera, at Elena, across time and distance, trying to communicate something that words couldn't carry. "Very well," the voice continued. "We will try again tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that, until you decide that truth is preferable to pain." The video ended. Elena sat frozen. Her mind raced through implications and possibilities. Jameson had been taken, kidnapped by people who knew about Syria, who knew about her, who wanted information that Jameson had been protecting for 5 years. Another text arrived. "You have 72 hours to reach the coordinates provided. Come alone, come unarmed, or Colonel Jameson dies and the world learns that America's heroes are nothing but murderers and liars." Elena read the message 3 times. Then she stood, walked to the window, looked out at Millbrook sleeping under its blanket of ordinary American darkness. 72 hours, 3 days to drive to Idaho, to find whatever waited at those coordinates, to trade herself for Jameson because that's what you did for the people who'd kept you alive. Or she could call the authorities, report the kidnapping, let the FBI and Special Forces handle it. That was the sensible option, the safe option. The option that acknowledged she was a civilian now and not responsible for fighting wars that had officially ended. But Elena had learned long ago that wars never really ended. They just paused, waited, gathered strength for the next round. And if she walked away now, Jameson would die. And the truth about Syria would die with him. And she'd spend whatever remained of her life knowing she'd chosen safety over honor. She pulled the fireproof box from beneath the floorboards. Inside were the tools of a life she'd tried to leave behind. Passport under her real name, $10,000 in cash, hard drives containing everything she'd backed up before burning her military files, and wrapped in oilcloth the sidearm she'd carried through 3 deployments. Sig Sauer P 226, 15 rounds of 9mm. Familiar weight, familiar balance. The kind of tool that fit her hand like prayer. Elena loaded the magazine, chambered around, engaged the safety, slipped the weapon into a holster she'd told herself she'd never wear again. At 4:45, she was in her truck, a decade-old Ford that she maintained obsessively because reliable transportation was the difference between escape and capture. The engine turned over on the first try. She let it warm while she programmed the coordinates into a GPS unit that wasn't connected to any network and therefore couldn't be tracked. 230 miles to the Idaho location, 4 hours if she drove straight through. But she wouldn't drive straight, would take back roads, would stop periodically to check for surveillance, would operate under the assumption that whoever had taken Jameson was watching her too. The sky was still dark when Elena left Millbrook. She didn't look back, didn't say goodbye to the life she'd built from the ashes of the old one, just drove north into the mountains where America kept its secrets and its ghosts. The sun rose somewhere over Wyoming. Elena drove with her window cracked so the cold air would keep her sharp. Coffee from a gas station, protein bar from her emergency kit, food for function, fuel for the body that would need to perform at levels she hadn't demanded in 3 years. At a rest stop outside Butte, she checked her weapons. The Sig Sauer was clean, ready. She'd also brought a knife, fixed blade, 6 inches, the kind of tool that never jammed or ran out of ammunition. And in the truck bed, hidden under a tarp, a rifle case. Inside was the Remington 700 that had been with her through 2 wars. 3 if you counted the one she was driving toward now. She'd told herself that she'd never touch it again. Had promised that Syria was the last time she'd look through a scope and make calculations about wind and distance and the exact point where a bullet would end a human life. But promises were luxuries. And luxury was something you surrendered when people you cared about started dying. The coordinates led to wilderness, national forest, the kind of country where people disappeared and weren't found until hikers stumbled across bones years later. Elena parked 5 miles from the target location, covered the truck with brush and camo netting, loaded her pack with everything she might need. Water, food, medical supplies, ammunition, the small collection of tools that turned a person into a self-sufficient weapon system. Then she started walking. The terrain was brutal, steep ridges, dense forest, elevation that made her lungs burn despite years of conditioning. But the difficulty was an advantage. Anyone monitoring the coordinates would expect approach by road, would position surveillance accordingly. Elena was coming from an angle that required 7 miles of hard hiking. The angle no one expected because no one sane would choose it. She moved through the forest like smoke, silent, invisible, using every skill she'd learned in schools that didn't officially exist. Ranger training, sniper school, the specialized courses that turned soldiers into ghosts. Her footsteps made no sound. Her passage left no trace. She was 28 years old and she'd forgotten how to be anything but a weapon. At dusk, she found high ground, set up an observation post with clear sight lines to the valley below. Through binoculars, she studied the coordinates. Old mining operation, abandoned since the 70s based on the rust and degradation, but not entirely abandoned. Fresh tire tracks, generator hum, and something that made her blood freeze. A figure in the valley, moving with military precision, carrying a weapon that even at 800 meters she recognized as modern tactical hardware. Guard rotation, 2-hour shifts based on her observation, 4 men total, professional, disciplined. The kind of security you paid for when hostages needed to stay alive and escape needed to stay impossible. Elena watched until full dark, counted the patterns, mapped the movements, built a 3-dimensional model of the compound in her head, entry points, kill zones, routes of egress. The tactical assessment came automatically. Muscle memory from 1,000 operations that had ended in violence or silence or some combination of both. She could go in, could eliminate the guards, could extract Jameson and disappear into the wilderness before anyone knew they'd been hit. She had the skills, had the weapons, had the cold certainty that came from knowing your cause was righteous and your enemies deserved what was coming. But something held her back. Some instinct that whispered this was wrong. Too easy, too obvious. The kind of setup that existed to provoke a predictable response. At midnight, her satellite phone buzzes, text message, another video. This one showed 2 people, Jameson in his chair, and next to him, someone else. Someone Elena's brain rejected for 3 full seconds before accepting the impossible truth. Tyler, her brother, her dead brother. The man she'd buried at Arlington 5 years ago, sitting in a concrete room in Idaho looking thinner and harder and older, but unmistakably, impossibly alive. The video showed Tyler's face, the scar through his left eyebrow from when they were kids, the crooked smile he'd inherited from their father, the eyes that had seen too much and survived anyway. And then he spoke. "Sis," his voice said, "I know this doesn't make sense. I know you think I'm dead, but I'm not. I've been here 5 years, and if you want to know why, you need to come alone. No backup, no cavalry, just you." The video ended. Elena sat in the darkness and tried to breathe, tried to process information that contradicted everything she knew to be true. Tyler was dead. She'd seen the reports, the dental records, the closed casket, the ceremony at Arlington where Marines had fired volleys into the sky and a bugler had played taps, and she'd stood there in uniform holding a folded flag that represented a brother reduced to memory. But memory didn't speak. Memory didn't move. Memory didn't look at a camera with eyes that held 5 years of suffering and somehow still managed to look like the kid who'd followed her into the army because keeping his sister safe was the only mission that mattered. If Tyler was alive, then everything she believed about Syria was wrong. The investigation was wrong. The official story was wrong. The 3 years she'd spent trying to build a normal life on top of a foundation of guilt and grief were wrong. And if Tyler was alive, then someone had lied. Someone had falsified records. Someone had let her bury an empty casket and believed that her mistake had killed the only family she had left. Elena made her decision in the space between heartbeats. She would go down to that compound, would walk through whatever trap they'd prepared, would trade her life for answers if that's what it took. Because Tyler was alive, and that changed everything. She moved down the mountain in darkness. No light, no sound, just controlled descent through terrain that could kill her as easily as any bullet. At 0300, she reached the valley floor. The compound sat 200 meters ahead. Lights, voices, the smell of cigarette smoke on the wind. Elena walked forward with her hands raised. Empty, visible, the universal signal of surrender. Spotlights hit her from 3 directions, blinding, overwhelming. Voices shouted in accented English. Commands to stop, to kneel, to lace her fingers behind her head. She complied. Smooth, professional. A soldier accepting capture because the mission required it. Hands grabbed her, searched her, found the Sig Sauer, the knife, the phone. Everything went into a bag. Everything that made her dangerous or connected or able to call for help. They brought her inside, through steel doors that belonged to another era, down concrete stairs that smelled of rust and earth and time, into a room where harsh fluorescent light made everything look sick and wrong. And there waiting were the two men who'd been dead for 5 years. Colonel Richard Jameson, beaten but unbroken, watching Elena with eyes that held apology and warning in equal measure. And Tyler Mora, her brother, her ghost, alive and scarred and so much older than 23 should ever look. Elena, Tyler whispered. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Before she could respond, another voice spoke, Russian accent, cultured, the kind of English that came from universities and intelligence services. Captain Mora, welcome. We have been expecting you. My name is Alexei Volkov, and you and I need to discuss what really happened in Syria. The door closed behind her, the lock engaged, and Elena understood with perfect clarity that she'd just walked into something far more dangerous than a simple kidnapping. She'd walked into the truth, and the truth, it turned out, was going to cost more than she'd ever imagined. The concrete room smelled of decay and diesel fuel. Fluorescent tubes buzzed overhead with the irregular rhythm of failing ballasts, casting shadows that made everything look diseased. Elena stood with her hands still raised, her mind working through tactical assessments, even as her heart tried to process the impossible reality sitting 3 meters away. Tyler was alive. 5 years of grief, 5 years of guilt, 5 years of carrying the weight of a brother she'd failed to protect. And all of it built on a lie so fundamental that reality itself seemed negotiable. He looked smaller than she remembered. Not physically. If anything, the years had added muscle and hardness to his frame. But something essential had been carved away. The easy confidence, the quick smile, the particular brand of young male invincibility that had made him volunteer for the hardest missions because death was something that happened to other people. The scar through his left eyebrow was still there, the crooked smile their father had passed down to both of them. But his eyes held things that 23-year-olds shouldn't know. Things that came from surviving when survival meant becoming something other than human. Elena, Tyler said again. His voice cracked on the second syllable. I know this is impossible. I know you buried me. But I've been here all this time, waiting. She wanted to run to him, wanted to wrap her arms around the ghost-made flesh and confirm through touch that he was real and solid and not another cruel trick played by a mind broken by war. But armed men surrounded her, and Colonel Jameson sat bleeding in a chair that had been bolted to the floor. And somewhere in the calculated choreography of this moment was a trap she hadn't yet identified. How? The word came out flat, tactical, the voice she used when emotion would compromise the mission. That is an excellent question, Captain Mora. The man who'd introduced himself as Alexei Volkov stepped into the light. He was 58, maybe 60, the kind of age that came with authority and scars. His English carried the precision of a second language mastered through necessity. His posture spoke military even though he wore civilian clothes. And his eyes held a particular emptiness that came from making hard decisions in dark places for longer than most people lived. Volkov gestured to a metal chair. Sit. We have much to discuss and very little time. Elena didn't move. I'm not sitting anywhere until someone explains why my brother has been dead for 5 years. He hasn't been dead, Volkov replied. He has been my guest. Against his will, certainly, but very much alive. Guest, the word hung in the air like smoke from a burned building. Elena felt rage building in her chest, the kind of cold fury that could make hands steady and hearts slow, and triggers pull with surgical precision. But rage was a luxury. Rage made you stupid, and stupid got you killed. She looked at Jameson. The colonel's face was a geography of violence. Bruises in purple and yellow, split lip crusted with dried blood, but his eyes were alert, watching her, trying to communicate something that words couldn't carry through the presence of armed men. Sit, Volkov repeated. There was no threat in his voice, just the certainty of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Elena calculated odds, 6 guards that she'd counted, probably more outside, her weapons confiscated, no backup, no extraction plan. Going kinetic would get them all killed. So she sat. The metal was cold through her jeans. Institutional. The kind of chair that existed in interrogation rooms and police stations, in places where the state reminded citizens that power wasn't equally distributed. Better, Volkov said. He pulled over another chair, sat across from Elena with the easy confidence of a man who controlled the room. Now, let me tell you a story about Syria, about chemical weapons and lies, about good soldiers who died because truth was inconvenient. He reached into his jacket, Elena's body tensed, muscle memory preparing for violence. But Volkov only withdrew a tablet computer, turned it on, swiped through files with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd briefed operations 1,000 times. Syria, 2019, he began. You were attached to a joint task force, Delta Force operators supported by Rangers and specialty assets. Your mission, as you understood it, was to eliminate high-value ISIS targets, yes? Elena said nothing. The non-disclosure agreements she'd signed were still legally binding. Discussing classified operations with foreign nationals was a felony that carried decades in federal prison. Volkov smiled. It wasn't warm. Your silence is noted and appreciated. But we are beyond the point where secrets serve anyone's interest. So I will tell you what you already know, and then I will tell you what you don't. He turned the tablet toward her. The screen showed a satellite photograph. Desert terrain, compound walls, the particular geometry of Syrian architecture that had become familiar through years of war. This building, Volkov continued, you were told it housed an ISIS commander named Abu Khalil. Intelligence said he was coordinating chemical weapons attacks on civilian populations. Your orders were to eliminate him. Long-range precision strike. You were the only asset with the skill to make that shot in those conditions. Elena stared at the photograph. She knew that building, had studied it for 3 days before the mission, had memorized every window, every door, every sight line, had calculated wind and distance in the 100 variables that separated perfect shots from close misses. The target emerged at 23:47 hours, Volkov said. Right on schedule, because we told him to, because Abu Khalil worked for me. The words landed like physical blows. Elena's hands gripped the chair arms. Her knuckles went white. His real name was Dmitry Sokolov, GRU officer, deep cover asset running operations in Syria since 2015. And on the night you killed him, he was attempting to defect to the United States with evidence of war crimes committed by both Russian and American forces. Volkov swiped the screen. A new image appeared. Document header in Cyrillic, official stamps, the visual language of bureaucracy that looked the same in every country. This is Sokolov's asylum application, submitted to your embassy in Ankara 48 hours before your mission. He offered everything, names, dates, locations of black sites where both our governments tested chemical weapons on Syrian civilians in violation of international law. Elena's throat had gone dry. She didn't want to believe him, wanted this to be propaganda, psychological warfare designed to undermine her faith in the mission and the men who'd given her orders. But something in the way Volkov spoke carried the weight of truth. Your CIA received his application, Volkov continued, and within 6 hours they passed targeting data to the Department of Defense. One high-value ISIS commander. Location confirmed. Green light for immediate action. They sent you because you were the best, because the shot needed to be perfect, because Dmitry Sokolov had to die before he could tell the world what America had been doing in the Syrian desert. That's not true, Elena said. Her voice sounded distant, someone else's voice coming from her mouth. The intelligence was solid. We had multiple sources confirming the target's identity. You had sources telling you what someone needed you to believe. Volkov's expression held something that might have been pity. Captain Mora, I have spent 30 years in this business. I know how the game is played. Truth is whatever serves the mission. And that night, the mission was making sure Dmitry Sokolov never testified about what he'd seen. Then why kill my team? Elena's hands were shaking now. She pressed them flat against her thighs. If you just wanted Sokolov dead, why destroy the building? Why murder 7 operators who were just following orders? Volkov paused. For the first time since entering the room, something human flickered across his face, because they saw things they weren't supposed to see, because in the process of gathering intelligence on Sokolov, they discovered the black site, found evidence, took photographs. Your team wasn't killed to eliminate witnesses to Sokolov's death. They were killed to eliminate witnesses to American war crimes. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Somewhere in the bunker, water dripped with metronomic persistence. Elena felt the world tilting. 5 years of believing she understood what happened. 5 years of carrying guilt for a mistake that had killed her brothers. And now this stranger with a Russian accent was telling her that everything she'd believed was inverted, that her shot had been perfect and the explosion had been murder disguised as collateral damage. "I don't believe you," she said. Volkov nodded, as if he'd expected this. Appreciated it even. "Good. You should not believe me. You should demand proof. So I will give you proof." He swiped the tablet again. This time the screen showed video. Drone footage. The timestamp read 23:49:32. 2 minutes after Elena's shot. The building stood intact in thermal imaging, and inside, glowing white against the cooler background, were 7 human signatures. "Your team," Volkov said quietly, "alive, moving, conducting their search." And then, the screen flashed white. When the image resolved, the building was gone. Just fire and debris and the expanding bloom of a thermobaric explosion. "A GM-114 Hellfire missile," Volkov continued, "fired from a Reaper drone operating out of an airbase your military won't acknowledge exists. The order came through encrypted channels. The pilot thought he was taking out an ISIS stronghold. He had no idea he was murdering American soldiers." Elena couldn't breathe. The video played again. 7 white signatures. Then nothing. Her brothers reduced to thermal ghosts in the fraction of a second it took ordnance to travel from sky to earth. Tyler spoke for the first time since Elena had sat down. "I was 20 meters from the building when it hit. The blast wave threw me clear. I woke up in the rubble. Couldn't hear anything. Couldn't see. Just fire and smoke and the smell of burning." His voice was rough, damaged. The voice of someone who'd screamed too much and breathed too much smoke and survived when survival meant living with memories that never faded. "Volkov's men found me," Tyler continued. "Pulled me out before the quick reaction force arrived. I was burned, bleeding, half dead. See, they could have left me, should have left me. But Alexei here, he wanted insurance, wanted proof that the explosion wasn't accidental, so he kept me alive." Elena turned to look at her brother, really look at him. The burn scars on his neck, the way his right hand trembled slightly, the 1,000-yard stare that came from spending too long in captivity. "5 years," she whispered. Tyler nodded. 5 years in different locations, moved every few months, always just out of reach when prisoner exchanges were negotiated. Alexei would send proof-of-life videos to the Pentagon, would offer to trade me for information about who ordered the strike. And every single time, your government would agree to terms, then cancel at the last minute. "Why?" Elena looked back at Volkov. "If you had leverage, why not force the exchange?" "Because someone very powerful wanted your brother to stay exactly where he was, dead officially, alive enough to be useful if needed, but never allowed to come home and tell the truth about what happened." Volkov stood, paced the room with the restless energy of a man accustomed to operational planning. "Your brother knows too much. He saw the drone, heard the radio traffic, can testify that the building was destroyed by American ordnance minutes after your shot. That makes him extraordinarily dangerous to whoever authorized the strike." "Who?" The question came out as a demand. "Who gave the order?" "That," Volkov said, "is why we are having this conversation. Because I don't know. The order came through JSOC channels, classified beyond my ability to intercept. But your Colonel Jameson knows, or suspects, which is why he also had to be contained." Jameson finally spoke. His voice was thick with pain. "Slate," he said. "General Marcus Slate. He was theater commander, only man with authority to authorize that kind of strike without higher approval. Marcus Slate." Elena knew the name. Everyone who'd served in Syria knew the name. 3-star general, Gulf War hero, man who'd modernized special operations and turned asymmetric warfare into a science. Now he wore 4 stars and sat as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, second most powerful military position in the country, advisor to presidents, architect of national defense policy. And according to Jameson, he'd murdered 7 American soldiers to cover up war crimes. "You can't prove it," Elena said. "Even if everything you're saying is true, you can't prove Slate gave that order. The chain of command has too many buffers, too much deniability built in." "Which is exactly why we need you," Volkov replied. "You are the perfect witness. War hero, Immigrant who served with honor. Sister of a man left to rot by his own government. If you testify, people will listen. The media will listen. Congress will listen. Even if we can't prove Slate gave the order directly, we can force an investigation. Make enough noise that someone with access talks. Testify where? Elena's tactical mind was already running scenarios, calculating angles, looking for the trap hidden in Volkov's seemingly reasonable proposal. The International Criminal Court. Preliminary hearing starts in 90 days. I am already indicted for chemical weapons use in Syria. If I testify and bring American witnesses, it becomes an international incident. Your government will have to respond, will have to investigate. And in that investigation, the truth will emerge. Or you'll get what you want, and I'll spend the rest of my life branded a traitor. Elena shook her head. This is a setup. You're using me to legitimize your defense, making it look like both sides committed crimes so yours don't seem as bad. Volkov smiled, colder this time. Captain Mora, I am guilty of the crimes I'm accused of. I ran the black site. I authorized chemical weapons testing. I have killed more people than you have years of life. But I did it under orders from my government, just as you followed orders from yours. The difference is I'm willing to admit what I did, to take responsibility, to ensure that the truth, however ugly, is not buried beneath convenient lies. The room fell silent. Elena looked at Tyler, at Jameson, at the armed men standing impassive against the walls, at Alexei Volkov, who stood before her claiming to be both war criminal and truth-teller, asking her to choose between loyalty to country and loyalty to the dead. What happens if I refuse, she asked. Volkov's expression didn't change. Then I release you and the colonel. Your brother remains my guest. And in 6 months, maybe a year, someone from your government will arrange an accident, something that ensures he never comes home, never testifies, never becomes the evidence that destroys Marcus Slate's career. You'd keep him prisoner. I would keep him alive, which is more than your own people have tried to do. Elena stood, the chair scraped against concrete. She walked to where Tyler sat, knelt in front of him, looked into eyes that used to be full of laughter and now held only exhaustion. Is it true? She asked quietly. All of it? Tyler reached out, touched her face with his trembling right hand, the same hand that used to throw baseballs in the refugee camp, the same hand that had signed enlistment papers because following his sister into the army seemed like the only path that made sense. I've had 5 years to think about it, he said. 5 years of being told that America was negotiating my release, that I just needed to be patient, that my government cared about getting me home. And every time Alexei would send proof I was alive, the Pentagon would delay, would make excuses, would find reasons why the exchange couldn't happen. After the first year, I understood. They don't want me home. They want me erased. What do you want me to do? Tyler's smile was broken but real. I want you to burn it all down. Every lie, every cover-up, every bastard who decided that 7 good men were acceptable losses to protect someone's career. Do what you do best, sis. Take the shot. Elena stood, turned back to Volkov. If I do this, if I testify, you release Tyler immediately, not after the hearing, not after some negotiation. Now. Volkov considered, then nodded. Agreed. But you and Colonel Jameson come with me to The Hague. Insurance that you'll actually appear. Number Elena's voice carried command authority now, the tone that had led men through doors where violence waited. Tyler goes free now. I'll give you my word I'll testify. And unlike some people, my word means something. Volkov studied her for a long moment. Then he laughed, a genuine sound that seemed out of place in the cold room. Captain Mora, you are either the most honorable fool I have ever met or the most calculating tactician. I suspect both. Very well. Your brother goes free. You and the colonel remain as my guests until we depart for The Hague. If you attempt to escape or fail to appear, I release the full video of the drone strike to every media outlet in the world. Your government will be forced to respond, but you will be discredited. Acceptable? Elena looked at Jameson. The colonel nodded slightly. It was the best deal they were going to get. And if Volkov was telling the truth about the drone footage, he already had enough evidence to force an investigation without their cooperation. The testimony just gave it legitimacy. Acceptable, Elena said. Volkov barked orders in Russian. 2 of the guards moved to Tyler, helped him stand. His legs barely supported his weight. 5 years of captivity had wasted muscle and damaged joints. He looked like an old man in a young body. There's a hospital in Missoula, Volkov said. My men will drive your brother there. They'll leave him at the emergency entrance. After that, he's on his own. I suggest he doesn't contact law enforcement for at least 48 hours. Give us time to be clear of the country. Elena moved to Tyler, hugged him, felt his ribs through the shirt, felt him shaking, felt 5 years of separation collapse into a moment that couldn't hold all the things they needed to say. I'm sorry, she whispered. I should have known, should have kept looking. You did what they told you to do. Tyler's voice cracked. Same as always. Same as all of us. But now we get to stop following orders and start demanding answers. They pulled apart. Tyler was crying, so was Elena, though she tried to hide it. Professional distance, tactical composure. All the armor that soldiers wore to survive horror was useless against the simple fact of a brother returned from the dead. The guards led Tyler away. Elena watched until the steel door closed, until she couldn't hear his footsteps anymore, until she was left with nothing but the promise that he'd reach safety and the terrible certainty that nothing would ever be simple again. Volkov gestured to the guards. Take the colonel to medical, clean him up. We leave in 6 hours. Where are we going? Elena asked. Canada first. I have resources there. Then Europe. We'll avoid major airports. Stay off grids. Your government will be looking for us the moment they realize what's happening. You think Slate knows you have us? I think Slate has known about this operation since before I took Jameson. Men like him don't survive to 4-star rank without extensive intelligence networks. He's probably deciding right now whether it's safer to let us reach The Hague or to ensure we have an accident en route. Elena processed this, calculated odds. She was in the custody of a Russian war criminal, being transported to an international court to testify against an American general. Every law enforcement and intelligence agency in the Western world would be hunting them. The chances of actually reaching The Hague alive hovered somewhere between minimal and non-existent. But Tyler was free, and that had to count for something. Volkov seemed to read her thoughts. You're wondering if you made a mistake, if trading your freedom for your brothers was tactically sound. The thought crossed my mind. He smiled, respect in the expression now. In your position, I would wonder the same. But consider this, your brother is now free to tell his story. Even if we die before reaching The Hague, he can corroborate everything, can give testimony, can be the witness that forces investigation. So you haven't traded your freedom for nothing. You've ensured the truth survives even if we don't. That's a pretty speech. Elena's voice was flat. But you're still a war criminal who's using me to avoid prosecution. Yes, I am. But I'm a war criminal who's offering you something your own government won't. The truth, justice, a chance to make the men who killed your brothers answer for their crimes. That has to be worth something. Before Elena could respond, the door opened. A guard entered, spoke rapidly in Russian. Volkov's expression changed, hardened. He replied in the same language. The guard left. What? Elena asked. We have a problem. Volkov moved to the table where he'd left the tablet, brought up a different screen. This showed a satellite image. Forest, roads, the mining facility where they currently stood, and overlaid in red 3 approaching vehicles. Who? Volkov zoomed the image, enhanced the resolution. The vehicles were military, unmarked but clearly tactical, and they were moving fast. Either your government has found us faster than expected, Volkov said, or someone has decided that none of us should reach The Hague alive. Elena moved to look at the screen. 3 vehicles meant at least 12 operators, maybe 18 if they were fully loaded, against Volkov's 6 guards plus whatever other resources he had on site. The tactical math wasn't good. How long until they arrive? Volkov checked his watch. 20 minutes. Maybe less if they're pushing hard. Can we evacuate? Not all of us. The colonel can't move fast enough, and my men need time to sanitize the facility, destroy evidence. Then we defend. Elena's mind shifted into combat mode, old training reasserting itself. She'd been in worse tactical situations. At least here she knew the terrain. I need weapons, and I need to know what assets you have. Volkov studied her. You want to fight alongside the man who kept your brother prisoner for 5 years? I want to stay alive long enough to testify. Whether that's alongside you or in spite of you doesn't matter. Right now we have a common enemy. We can hate each other after we survive. Volkov laughed again. That same genuine sound. Captain Mora, you are wasted on peacetime. Very well, we fight together. But understand this. If it comes down to a choice between your life and my escape, I will choose my escape. I am not a good man. I don't pretend to be. Understood. Now give me a rifle and point me at the best defensive position. The next 15 minutes moved with the compressed urgency of pre-combat preparation. Volkov's men distributed weapons, Russian manufacture mostly, AK pattern rifles, familiar enough to anyone who'd trained on enemy weapon systems. Elena checked the action, loaded magazine, verified sights. The muscle memory came back instantly. Her body remembered what her mind had tried to forget. Jameson was moved to an interior room, too injured to fight, too important to risk. 2 guards stayed with him. The remaining 4 plus Volkov and Elena positioned themselves at key points in the facility. Overlapping fields of fire, interlocking positions, basic defensive tactics that had been doctrine since humans started killing each other over territory. Elena took position on the 2nd level. Concrete pillbox design, heavy walls that would stop most small arms fire, narrow firing ports that limited exposure, clear sight lines to the main approach road. She settled into position, checked range markers, noted wind direction, began the mental preparation that turned fear into focus. Volkov climbed up beside her, carried a Dragunov marksman rifle, old Soviet design but reliable. He set up adjacent to Elena's position. For several minutes they worked in silence, 2 professionals preparing for violence with the easy efficiency of people who'd done this too many times to need conversation. "How many times have you done this?" Elena asked finally. "Set up a defensive position knowing the odds weren't good." Volkov considered. "Afghanistan in the 80s, Chechnya in the 90s, Syria more times than I can count." "And you?" "Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. Training exercises that weren't really training. The missions we don't talk about. The ones that don't officially exist." Elena nodded. "Those." They fell silent again. Outside, twilight was settling over the Idaho mountains, the kind of vast American wilderness where people could disappear and never be found, where black operations happened far from oversight and the only witnesses were trees and rock and sky. "Do you think we'll survive this?" Elena asked. Volkov checked his rifle, chambered around. "Honestly? No, if those vehicles contain who I think they contain, we're facing Tier 1 operators. Men trained to the same standard you were, maybe better. We have defensive advantage and familiarity with terrain, but they have numbers and surprise and the certainty that comes from operating with government approval. Then why fight? Why not surrender? Because surrender means a bullet in a room somewhere, means my story dies and Slate wins and nothing changes. At least if we fight, we might take enough of them with us that someone asks questions. Might make enough noise that the cover-up becomes harder than the truth." Elena understood. She'd made similar calculations in other places. The math of last stands, the cold logic that said sometimes dying on your feet beat living on your knees. Movement on the road. Both of them saw it simultaneously, thermal optics showing 3 vehicles slowing as they approached. Professional, cautious, no lights, engine sounds barely audible. "Here we go," Volkov muttered. The vehicles stopped 400 meters out. Doors open, figures emerged, moving with tactical precision, spreading out, establishing perimeter. Elena counted 12. No, 14. 2-man teams, standard small unit tactics. "They're not Russian," she said. "Number." Volkov's voice carried certainty. "Those are American operators, which means Slate decided that silencing us was worth the risk of deploying assets on domestic soil. Can you be sure? Watch how they move. The spacing, the hand signals. That's American training, probably Delta or SEALs. Men who've done this 1,000 times." Elena watched. Volkov was right. The approaching force moved with the synchronized efficiency that came from years of training and combat. These weren't hired contractors. These were elite military operators, which meant Slate had resources and authorization that went beyond what one general should possess. Unless Slate wasn't acting alone, unless the cover-up went higher than anyone had suspected, the attackers began their approach. Fire team movement, covering and advancing, using terrain, professional and patient and absolutely certain of their superiority. "Wait for my signal," Volkov said. "Let them get close, make them think we're unaware." Elena settled into her shooting position. Breathing slowed, heart rate dropped. The world narrowed to the space visible through her sights. This was familiar. This was the place where she'd spent hundreds of hours, where time moved differently and consequences were measured in millimeters in milliseconds. The approaching team reached 200 meters, still advancing, weapons ready, night vision engaged, looking for thermal signatures and movement. Volkov keyed his radio, spoke in Russian, his men acknowledged. Everyone ready, everyone waiting. 150 meters, the kill zone. The distance where defensive fire became devastating and escape became impossible. Now, Volkov said, the facility erupted. Muzzle flashes from multiple positions, interlocking fire that turned the approach corridor into a geometry of death. The attacking force scattered, seeking cover, returning fire. The sound was overwhelming. Rifles, machine guns, the sharp crack of rounds passing close enough to feel the pressure wave. Elena acquired targets, smooth, mechanical. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. Downrange, a figure dropped. She shifted, found another target, fired. The second figure dove for cover. Miss or near miss. Hard to tell in darkness, broken only by muzzle flash. The attackers were good. They adapted quickly. Suppressive fire forced Volkov's men to keep heads down while other elements maneuvered. Classic infantry tactics executed with precision. "We can't hold them!" Volkov shouted over the gunfire. "They're too good. Too many." "How long do you need?" Elena fired again. Watched another attacker go down. Maybe a hit. Maybe just tactical repositioning. 10 minutes. I have a vehicle staged. Emergency exit through the mine tunnel. But we need to keep them occupied while my men extract the kernel. Elena's magazine ran dry. She reloaded. Fast. Automatic. Hands moving through the sequence without conscious thought. Where's the tunnel? North side. Hidden entrance. Comes out 3 miles from here. Vehicle waiting. Keys in the ignition. "Go, I'll cover. You'll die." "Probably. But I'm a better shot than your men, and I'm not the one who needs to reach The Hague. You testify. You make this mean something. I'll buy you the time." Volkov stared at her, some emotion flickering across his face. Respect, maybe. Or the recognition of one soldier understanding another's choice. Then he nodded, keyed his radio, gave orders. His men began falling back. Controlled retreat. Maintaining fire discipline. Keeping the attackers suppressed while they moved Jameson toward the tunnel. Elena shifted position. Found new angles. Kept shooting. The rifle was an extension of her will. Every shot calculated, every trigger pull measured. She wasn't trying to win, just trying to buy seconds that might add up to minutes that might add up to escape. Return fire intensified. Rounds sparked off concrete. Dust filled the air. Something hot grazed her shoulder. Not a direct hit, just the kiss of a bullet passing close. She ignored it, kept firing. Below, she heard engines. Volkov's people evacuating, taking Jameson, running for the tunnel that would carry them away from this place. The attackers realized what was happening, changed tactics, stopped advancing, started lobbing grenades. 40mm launched from underslung weapons. The explosions shook the building. Shrapnel screamed through the air. One of Volkov's guards went down. Didn't get up. Elena was alone now. Last defender. Buying time measured in heartbeats. She fired her last magazine, dropped the rifle, drew the pistol someone had returned to her. Sig Sauer, 15 rounds, not enough to stop 14 operators, but enough to make them careful. A voice called from the darkness. Female, American accent. "Captain Mora, stand down. You're surrounded. There's no need for this to end badly." Elena didn't respond, just waited. "We know about Volkov. We know he's manipulating you. This whole thing is a Russian intelligence operation. They're using you to embarrass the United States. Don't be their puppet." The voice was reasonable, calm, the voice of someone trained in negotiation, someone who believed what they were saying, or at least believed Elena might believe it. "Tyler's alive," Elena called back. 5 years your people told me he was dead. 5 years I carried that weight, and all of it was lies. Silence, then. "We can discuss this, but not here, not like this. Put down your weapon, come with us, we'll sort this out." Elena laughed, harsh, bitter. "Sorting it out is what got 7 men killed. Sorting it out is what left my brother in a Russian prison. I'm done sorting things out." She fired twice, not at targets, just noise. Statement of intent. The response was immediate. Sustained fire. The building shook. Concrete dust filled the air. Something heavy collapsed somewhere below. Elena was out of time. She ran through the facility, down corridors she'd memorized during the brief preparation. Behind her, the sound of entry teams breaching, boots on concrete, radio chatter, the organized chaos of professionals clearing a building. The tunnel entrance was ahead. Steel door, heavy, built to withstand blast. Elena hit it at full speed, felt it give, stumbled into darkness beyond. Behind her, shouts, flashlights. The pursuit was seconds away. Elena ran into the mine tunnel. Ancient, unstable. The kind of place where one wrong step meant falling into shafts that went down forever. But Volkov had said 3 miles. 3 miles to the exit, to the vehicle, to whatever came next. She ran in darkness, hands touching walls, feet finding purchase by instinct. Behind her, the pursuit sounds grew closer. Flashlights painted the walls. Voices echoed. The tunnel branched. Elena chose right. No reason, just instinct. The passage narrowed. Ceiling dropped. She had to crouch, had to slow. Light ahead. Not flashlight. Natural light. Moon or stars or the dim glow of a sky not yet committed to full night. Elena burst from the tunnel into wilderness. Pine trees, mountain air, freedom. And sitting 30 meters away, a truck. Old Ford, engine running, exactly as Volkov had promised. She sprinted, reached the truck, threw herself into the driver's seat. The engine was warm, ready. She slammed it into gear. Behind her, figures emerged from the tunnel. Weapons raised, muzzle flashes lit the darkness. Elena stomped the accelerator. The truck surged forward. Rounds punched through the rear window, through the cab. One passed so close to her head she felt the heat. But she was moving, escaping. The rough trail barely qualified as a road, but the truck's suspension handled it. Trees blurred past, the shooters fell behind. She drove for 20 minutes before allowing herself to believe she might actually survive. Before checking the shoulder wound that burned with increasing insistence. Just a graze. Bleeding but not arterial. Painful but survivable. In the distance, she saw lights. Vehicles. Volkov's convoy, probably. Moving fast, heading for the Canadian border and whatever waited beyond. Elena could follow, could catch up, could continue this insane mission to testify at The Hague about crimes committed by men powerful enough to send kill teams into American wilderness. Or she could turn around, drive back to Millbrook, pretend this had never happened, trust that Tyler would stay silent and Volkov would fail, and eventually the whole mess would fade into classified obscurity. She thought about Tyler, about his trembling hands and broken voice, about 5 years stolen by people who valued convenience over truth. She thought about the 7 names on a memorial wall, about families who'd buried empty caskets, about the lie that said their sons and husbands and brothers had died in training accidents. She thought about General Marcus Slate, 4 stars, Joint Chiefs, probably sitting in the Pentagon right now, receiving reports about the operation, calculating whether the mess could be contained or whether more drastic measures were required. Elena turned the truck north, toward the Canadian border, toward Volkov's convoy, toward whatever justice looked like when the system itself was broken. The road ahead was dark, unknown, probably ended in disaster, but at least it was the truth. And after 5 years of living with lies, truth felt like something worth dying for. The Canadian border materialized through pre-dawn fog like a memory half remembered. Elena had been driving for 6 hours, straight north through wilderness that barely acknowledged human existence. No headlights, just moonlight and instinct in the kind of navigational sense that came from years of moving through hostile territory. The truck's engine coughed, temperature gauge climbing into red. She'd pushed it too hard, asked too much from machinery that had already given everything it had. But the border was close now, maybe 5 miles, maybe less. Close enough that stopping meant failure. The radio crackled. Volkov's voice, encrypted frequency, short-range tactical comms that wouldn't register on most monitoring equipment. Captain Mora, I see your headlights off my 6, you're following. Elena keyed the mic. Seemed like the thing to do. Silence. Then something that might have been a laugh. You are either very brave or very stupid. I haven't decided which. Does it matter? Perhaps not. Stay close. The crossing is unmarked. Easy to miss in the dark. The convoy ahead slowed. 3 vehicles. moving with the cautious precision of people who knew that borders were just lines on maps until armed men decided they meant something. Volkov's lead vehicle turned onto a logging road that looked abandoned. Elena followed. The forest closed in, pine trees thick enough to block starlight. The track beneath her wheels was more suggestion than road. Ruts deep enough to bottom out the suspension, branches scraping against metal like fingernails on coffin wood. Then the trees opened. A clearing. And in the clearing, two vehicles already waiting. Not Volkov's. Different. Newer. The kind of SUVs that spoke of money and organization. Elena's hand moved to the Sig Sauer on the passenger seat. Muscle memory. Tactical assessment. If this was an ambush, she had maybe 3 seconds before it turned kinetic. Volkov's vehicle stopped. Doors opened. He stepped out. No weapon visible. Hands loose at his sides. The universal language of non-threat, or the confidence of someone who knew he controlled the situation. A woman emerged from one of the waiting vehicles, 50 years old, maybe older, hard to tell in the dim light. She wore civilian clothes but moved military, carried herself with the particular brand of authority that came from making life and death decisions in rooms where the public never looked. She and Volkov embraced, brief, professional, the greeting of colleagues rather than friends. Elena stayed in the truck, engine running, ready to flee if this turned bad. But Volkov turned and gestured, the motion clear, get out, meet someone important. She killed the engine, stepped into the cold. Her shoulder throbbed where the bullet had grazed. The bleeding had stopped hours ago, but the wound was stiff, would need cleaning, probably antibiotics. Definitely rest that she wasn't going to get. The woman approached, extended a hand. Her grip was firm, dry, the handshake of someone accustomed to negotiation. Captain Mora, my name is Sarah Chen. Until 3 years ago, I was a case officer with the Central Intelligence Agency. Now I'm what they call a private citizen with concerns about government overreach. Elena studied her. Sarah Chen, the name triggered recognition. She'd heard it before, somewhere in the classified briefings that happened before deployments. Something about Cold War operations, about officers who'd operated in places where getting caught meant execution. Your CIA was. Past tense. They asked me to retire after I started asking inconvenient questions about Syria. What kind of questions? The kind that got 7 good men killed. Sarah's expression was neutral, but her eyes held weight. I was married to one of them. Staff Sergeant James Wu. He was on your team. The name hit Elena like a physical blow. James Wu, 29 years old, parents in California. He'd been the team medic. The guy who carried extra weight because he knew combat medicine could mean the difference between death and disability. The guy who'd taught Elena basic Mandarin during downtime because he thought cross-cultural communication was important. I'm sorry, Elena said. The words felt inadequate, meaningless, but she said them anyway. Don't be sorry. Be angry. Sarah's voice was steady, cold. The kind of cold that came from years of grief compressed into diamond-hard purpose. James died because someone decided truth was less important than careers. And for 3 years, I've been trying to find out who. Alexei here has been helpful. Volkov shrugged. We both want the same thing. Justice or revenge. The terms are interchangeable at this point. Sarah turned to Elena. I've been investigating General Marcus Slate since 6 months after Syria, building a case, gathering evidence. But everything I found was circumstantial. Redacted files, suspicious timing, money moving through accounts that didn't quite make sense. Nothing that would hold up in court, nothing that would force an investigation. Until Tyler, Elena said. Sarah nodded. Your brother is the first witness who can testify about what actually happened, who saw the drone, who heard the radio traffic, who survived to tell the truth. Where is Gary now? Safe. I have people watching the hospital in Missoula. Good people. Former agency officers who owe me favors. As soon as Tyler's stable, they'll move him to a secure location. You're running an unauthorized intelligence operation on American soil. Sarah's smile was cold. I'm protecting a witness. There's a difference. Not according to the law. The law, Sarah said, is what powerful men say it is, until someone makes them answer for breaking it. Volkov gestured toward the vehicles. We should move. The crossing window is narrow. Canadian authorities look the other way for 30 minutes. After that, we're trespassing and they have to respond. They loaded into the vehicles. Elena rode with Sarah, Volkov with his men. The convoy rolled forward into pre-dawn darkness that could have been anywhere, could have been nowhere, just forest and calm and the particular quality of silence that existed in wild places. Tell me about Slate, Elena said. Sarah drove with the easy competence of someone who'd conducted surveillance in 100 cities. Eyes moving, checking mirrors, aware of everything. Marcus Slate, born 1959, Oklahoma, middle-class family, joined the Army in 1977 because Vietnam had just ended and he wanted to prove something. Rose fast, made captain by 25, major by 30, every efficiency report glowing, every commander calling him the future of special operations. That's the official biography. That's the sanitized version. Sarah's hands tightened on the wheel. The real Marcus Slate is a man who learned early that perception matters more than reality. That if you control the narrative, you control the outcome. He made his reputation in the Gulf War, led a deep penetration mission that supposedly destroyed Iraqi command and control, got a Silver Star, got promoted to colonel. Supposedly, the mission happened. The results are questionable. But by the time anyone could verify, Slate was already the golden boy. And golden boys don't get second-guessed. The convoy crossed into Canada without ceremony. No checkpoint, no guards, just a gap in the trees where the forest looked the same on both sides, but the jurisdiction changed. They were in another country now, technically safe from American law enforcement, practically still within reach of anyone with resources and authorization. After Gulf War, Sarah continued, Slate became the face of modernized warfare, wrote doctrine, testified before Congress, sold politicians on the idea that small teams with advanced technology could replace large-scale deployments. He wasn't wrong, but he also used that platform to build a network. Officers who owed him, contractors who depended on his decisions. A whole ecosystem designed to amplify his power. And somewhere in there, he decided chemical weapons testing was acceptable. Sarah was quiet for a moment. The only sound was tires on rough road and the distant rumble of Volkov's vehicles ahead. I don't think it started with Syria, she said finally. I think Syria was just where it became undeniable, where someone with a conscience saw what was happening and tried to blow the whistle. Dmitry Sokolov. Yes, Sokolov was GRU, but he was also a father, had 2 daughters in Moscow, and he saw what the chemical testing was doing to Syrian children. Saw the burns, the lung damage, the slow deaths. He couldn't reconcile being a soldier with being a man who enabled that. So he tried to defect. He contacted the embassy in Ankara, offered everything, names, locations, evidence that both Russian and American forces were running a joint black site, testing binary nerve agents, seeing how much exposure it took to incapacitate versus kill, using Syrian civilians as lab rats. Elena felt sick. The wound in her shoulder seemed trivial compared to the wound in her understanding of what she'd been part of. She'd believed in the mission, believed that every target she eliminated made the world safer, believed the men giving orders had honor and judgment and some fundamental commitment to doing right. And all of it was built on sand. Why kill the team, she asked. Why not just kill Sokolov? Because your team found the site. James and the others were gathering intelligence on Sokolov's location. They were supposed to confirm he was ISIS. Instead, they found the black site, found evidence, took photographs. They were professionals. They documented everything. So Slate had to destroy the evidence and the witnesses and make it look like collateral damage from your operation. Sarah's voice was tight, controlled fury barely contained. One sniper shot triggers secondary explosions, tragic but understandable. The kind of accident that happens in war. No one's fault, just bad luck and bad intel. Except it wasn't an accident. No, it was murder, premeditated, calculated, and if it hadn't been for Alexei pulling your brother from the rubble, it would have been perfect. The sky was lightening now, dawn spreading across the Canadian wilderness in shades of gray and gold. They'd been driving for 40 minutes, deep into territory where borders mattered less than trees and rock and the vast indifference of nature. Ahead, Volkov's convoy slowed, turned onto a side road that barely qualified as a trail. 5 minutes later, they stopped at a structure that looked abandoned. Old hunting lodge, maybe. Walls weathered to silver, roof sagging, the kind of place that existed in the gaps of maps. But inside, the lodge was operational, generators humming, lights working, radio equipment set up on tables that looked military surplus. This was a safe house, the kind of facility intelligence agencies maintain for operations that couldn't be acknowledged. Volkov was waiting when Elena entered. He'd cleaned up, changed clothes, looked almost respectable, almost like someone you could trust. "We stay here for 6 hours," he said. "Rest, medical attention. Then we continue to Toronto. From there, a charter flight to Iceland. Iceland to Amsterdam. Amsterdam to The Hague. 36 hours if everything goes according to plan. And if it doesn't, then we improvise, as we have been doing." Colonel Jameson sat in a chair by the window. Someone had cleaned his wounds, bandaged his face, given him water and what looked like military rations. He looked old, older than 62, older than men should look outside of war zones. He saw Elena, managed a smile. "Still alive, Captain. Must be doing something right." Elena crossed to him, knelt so they were eye level. "How bad?" "Cracked ribs, possible concussion, various contusions. Nothing that'll kill me if I can avoid getting shot in the next day or two." "Think you can make it to The Hague?" Jameson's smile widened. Even broken, it carried determination. "I've made it through worse, and I owe those boys more than giving up now." Sarah entered with a medical kit, started working on Elena's shoulder without asking permission. The antiseptic burned. Elena didn't flinch, just stared out the window at trees that looked the same as trees everywhere, as if the geography of trauma could be escaped by crossing borders. "Why are you helping us?" Elena asked. "You could have stayed retired, could have let this go." Sarah cleaned the wound with efficient movements, the touch of someone who'd done field medicine before. "I tried letting it go. Spent a year telling myself James died in service to something bigger, that his sacrifice mattered, that the lies were necessary to protect operations and assets and the greater good." "What changed?" "I got the autopsy report, the real one, not the sanitized version his parents received." Sarah's hands paused. He had Novichok in his lungs. Chemical weapons agent, Soviet design. He didn't die from the explosion. He died from the wax released when the building was hit, which means someone knew there were chemical weapons in that building, knew and sent the strike anyway. They wanted to destroy the evidence. They wanted to destroy everything. Sarah resumed working. Butterfly bandages pulled the wound closed. The nerve agents, the bodies, the proof that American forces were complicit in war crimes. "Your shot on Sokolov was just the trigger. The real crime was using a Hellfire missile to sanitize a site where American soldiers were standing. That's not accident. That's not collateral damage. That's murder." The word hung in the air. Murder. Not the clean kind that happened in combat, not the necessary evil of warfare, but cold calculation. The decision that 7 American lives were worth less than protecting a general's career. Volkov appeared in the doorway. "We have a problem." His voice was calm but carried urgency. "What kind of problem?" "The kind with helicopters, 2 of them. American registry but unmarked. Coming in low, fast. They'll be here in 5 minutes." Elena was on her feet. "How did they find us?" Volkov shrugged. "Satellite tracking, signal intercept, informant. Does it matter? They're coming and we need to leave." The lodge erupted into controlled chaos. Volkov's men grabbing equipment. Sarah destroying hard drives with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd sanitized safe houses before. Jameson struggling to stand. Elena helping him while her mind raced through tactical options. 2 helicopters meant at least 8 operators. Maybe 12. Against Volkov's 4 remaining guards plus Sarah plus Elena plus a colonel who could barely walk. The math wasn't good. "Can we run?" Elena asked. Volkov checked his watch. "Not fast enough. The vehicles are exposed. They'll have thermal imaging, air superiority. We run and they pick us off one by one. Then we fight. We fight, we die. These aren't contractors. These are Tier 1 assets. The men slate trust to clean up messes." Elena looked at Sarah, then at Jameson, at Volkov, at the handful of Russian soldiers who'd followed orders into a situation that was spiraling toward a conclusion none of them would survive. There was another option, the one she'd been trained for, the one that required sacrifice. "You take Jameson and run," she said to Volkov. "I'll stay. Slow them down." Volkov stared at her. "You'll die, probably, but you'll get a head start, maybe enough to reach civilization. Get on record. Make my death mean something." Sarah grabbed Elena's arm. "You can't. We need you alive. You're the witness, the sister of a survivor, the one person who can make this story resonate. Tyler can testify. You can testify. Jameson can testify, but only if you're alive to do it. Elena pulled free, gently but firmly. This is what I'm good at, what I was trained for, buying time with bullets. It's the one thing I can still do that matters. The sound of rotors grew louder, close now, maybe 2 minutes. Volkov made a decision, barked orders in Russian. His men moved, grabbing Jameson, supporting him toward the back exit. Sarah hesitated, then nodded, the acknowledgement of one warrior to another. Make them pay for it, Sarah said. That's the plan. They left. Elena watched them disappear into the forest, watched until she couldn't see them anymore. Then she turned to the weapons Volkov's men had left. Russian rifles, American pistol, enough ammunition to make the next 15 minutes extremely expensive for whoever came through that door. She positioned herself in the lodge's second floor. Good sight lines, multiple firing positions. The kind of setup that would let one person hold against many. For a while, until the inevitable. The helicopters landed in the clearing outside. Doors opened. Figures emerged. Moving fast. Professional. The kind of operators who trained for this scenario 100 times. Elena counted them. 8. No, 10. 2 fire teams. Standard small unit tactics. They'd breach from multiple angles. Overwhelmed with speed and violence. Clear the lodge in under a minute if she let them. She wasn't going to let them. The first team approached the front entrance. Stacked up. Ready to breach. Elena let them commit. Let them think they had surprise. Then she opened fire. The lead operator went down. The second scattered. Return fire punched through the lodge walls. Splintered wood. Shattered windows. The structure wasn't built for combat. Would provide concealment but not cover. Would slow bullets but not stop them. Elena moved. Changed position. Fired from a different window. The discipline of someone who'd learned that staying still meant dying. 2 more operators seeking cover, 1 limping, maybe a hit, maybe just tactical repositioning. The second team breaches from the rear. Elena heard them. Heavy boots on wooden floors. Commands shouted in the clipped language of military operators. They were inside now. The fight had moved from standoff to close quarters. She fell back. Through the second floor. Down a hallway that smelled of mold and time. Behind her, the sound of pursuit. Professional. Methodical. They knew she was alone. Knew she couldn't hold forever. Were content to pressure until she made a mistake. Elena reached the end of the hallway, window overlooking the back. She could jump. Maybe survive the fall. Maybe escape into the forest. Maybe run and hide and live to fight another day. Instead, she turned around, raised her rifle, fired at the first figure that appeared. The fight that followed lasted 90 seconds. The kind of close-range violence that happened in heartbeats and left bodies in hallways. Elena moved and fired and moved again, using every trick she'd learned, every technique drilled into muscle memory. She took one of them down, maybe 2, hard to confirm in the chaos, but they kept coming, professional, patient, willing to accept casualties because they had numbers and she had only skill. A flash grenade detonated, blinding, deafening. Elena stumbled. Her rifle was torn from her hands. Strong grips seized her arms, forced her down. Zip ties cut into her wrists. When her vision cleared, she was on her knees. 5 operators surrounding her. 2 more checking the rooms, confirming the lodge was clear, that she'd been alone. A 6th figure entered, different from the others, older. Carried himself with the authority of command. He wore civilian clothes, but everything about him screamed military. Captain Mora, his voice was mild, almost friendly. You've led us on quite a chase. Elena said nothing, just studied his face, memorizing features in case she survived to testify. My name is Colonel Wade Briggs, Delta Force. I've been sent to bring you home. Home to what? A courtroom? A prison? An accident that looks like suicide? Briggs smiled. You've been compromised by Russian intelligence. You're being manipulated, used as a propaganda tool to embarrass the United States. We're here to extract you from a hostile situation. Is that the official story? That's the truth. You're a victim, Captain, not a criminal. Come with us. Let us debrief you. Sort out what actually happened versus what the Russians want you to believe. Elena laughed. The sound was harsh, broken. You must think I'm stupid. I think you're traumatized. I think 5 years of survivor's guilt has made you vulnerable to manipulation. I think Russian intelligence officers are very good at exploiting emotional vulnerabilities. Briggs crouched so they were eye level. We found your brother. He's safe, in military custody, receiving medical care. You can see him, talk to him, verify he's being treated well. Where? Walter Reed Medical Center. Full suite, best doctors, whatever he needs. But he's asking for you, wants to know you're safe. Elena processed this. Tyler in military custody meant Tyler couldn't testify freely. Meant doctors and handlers in carefully controlled statements. Meant the story would be shaped and sanitized and turned into whatever narrative served the Pentagon's interests. I want to speak with him. Verify he's actually there. Briggs nodded to one of the operators. The man produced a satellite phone, dialed, handed it to Elena. The phone rang 3 times, then a voice she knew better than her own. Sis? Tyler! Elena's voice cracked. Are you okay? I'm okay. They're treating me well. Good food, clean bed. First time I've felt safe in 5 years. Where are you? Walter Reed. Like they said. He sounded tired. Medicated, maybe. It's over, Elena. You can come home. We can both come home. What about Slate? What about the men who killed our brothers? Silence on the line, then Tyler's voice quieter. They said we can't fight this. That Slate's too powerful. That going public would just get us killed and change nothing. You believe that? I believe I'm tired. I believe I want to sleep without wondering if tomorrow I'll be tortured. I believe I want to see my sister without armed guards watching. He paused. Please, just come home. Let this go. Elena closed her eyes, listened to her brother's voice, heard the exhaustion, the defeat, the surrender that came from 5 years of captivity, breaking something fundamental in his soul. But she also heard something else, a wrongness, a flatness, the particular quality that voices got when someone was speaking under duress. Tyler, she said carefully, remember the story Dad used to tell about the bird in the cage? Silence, then, yeah, I remember. What did the bird choose? More silence. Longer this time. Then Tyler's voice. Stronger now. The bird chose to fly, even knowing it might die outside the cage. Because some things are worth dying for. The line went dead. Elena looked up at Briggs. He's not asking me to come home. He's being used to bait me. Briggs's expression didn't change. You're making this harder than it needs to be. You're going to kill me, whether I cooperate or not, because I know too much and I'm too stubborn to stay silent, not kill. Briggs stood. Detain, debrief. Ensure you understand the consequences of making false accusations against a 4-star general. It's for your own protection. Protection. Elena tested her restraints. Zip ties. Tight. Professional. The kind that would require tools or serious force to break. I think we have different definitions of that word. Briggs gestured to his men. They pulled Elena to her feet, started moving her toward the exit. Outside, the helicopters waited, engines idling, ready for immediate departure. They were halfway across the clearing when the first shot came. The operator to Elena's left dropped. Clean headshot. The kind of precision that spoke of professional marksmanship at extended range. The remaining operators scattered, seeking cover, weapons coming up, scanning for threats. A second shot, another operator down, then a third. Someone was engaging from the tree line, distance maybe 400 meters, using the forest for concealment, picking targets with deliberate care. Briggs was shouting, organizing response, suppressive fire into the trees. But the sniper had already moved, was firing from a different position, the hallmark of someone who understood counter-sniper tactics. In the chaos, Elena saw her chance. She rolled, came up moving, hands still bound but legs free, sprinted for the tree line. Behind her, shouts, weapons fire, rounds kicking up dirt. She made the trees, kept running, branches tearing at her face, roots trying to trip her. But she was moving, escaping, the sound of pursuit falling behind. A figure emerged from the forest ahead. Elena's body tensed for impact, but the figure lowered their weapon, stepped into a shaft of light that penetrated the canopy. Sheriff Tom Hendricks, 45 years old, prosthetic leg, retired force recon, carrying a rifle that looked familiar because it was Elena's, the Remington 700 she'd left in her truck. Figured you could use a hand, he said. How did you find me? Tracked your truck, then tracked the thermal signatures, then waited for someone to do something stupid. His knife made short work of the zip ties. Looks like I timed it right. You just killed federal operators. I killed people who were kidnapping a friend. There's a difference. Hendricks handed her the rifle. Besides, they shot first. I was just returning fire. Behind them, the sound of helicopters spooling up. Briggs regrouping. They had maybe 2 minutes before the hunt resumed. "Where's Volkov?" Elena asked. "Gone. Got Jameson across the border into more civilized parts of Canada. Sarah's with them. They're heading for Toronto. Charter flight leaves in 6 hours. Can we make it? If we move fast and don't stop to sightsee." They ran. Through forests that all looked the same, following paths only Hendricks seemed to see. The sound of helicopters grew louder. Searching. Quartering the area with the methodical efficiency of people who had time and resources and authorization to use both. 2 miles in, Hendricks led them to a creek, waded upstream for half a mile. The water was ice cold, numbing, but it would confuse thermal tracking. Would buy them minutes that might translate to escape. They emerged from this creek at a logging road. Sitting there, engine running, was a truck Elena didn't recognize. Hendricks climbed in, gestured for her to follow. "Whose truck?" she asked. "Friend of a friend. Don't ask too many questions." They drove, fast but not reckless. The kind of speed that suggested urgency without advertising panic. Behind them, the sound of helicopters faded. Either they'd lost the pursuit or Briggs had decided discretion was preferable to chasing armed suspects through Canadian wilderness. "How did you know?" Elena asked after 20 minutes of silence. "How did you know to come?" "Your brother called me. Soon as they moved him to Walter Reed. Used a nurse's phone. Told me you were walking into a trap. Asked me to even the odds." Tyler, kid's tougher than he looks. 5 years of hell, and he's still thinking tactical. They drove through morning light that made the world look clean and new, as if the darkness of the previous hours had been imagined. As if truth and justice were things that still mattered in a world where generals could order murders and walk free. "What happens now?" Hendricks asked. "Now we get to Toronto, get on that plane, make it to The Hague before Slate can stop us. And then we tell the truth. Make it so loud and so public that burying it costs more than admitting it. Force an investigation. Demand accountability." "You think that'll work?" Elena checked the rifle, confirmed it was loaded. "Ready. I think it's the only thing left worth trying." They drove through Canada toward a city that promised anonymity and airlines that asked fewer questions than American carriers. Toward a future that looked like either justice or martyrdom depending on how the next 48 hours played out. Behind them, the forest held its secrets. 7 names on a memorial wall, a brother returned from the dead, a general who'd committed murder and called it necessity. And somewhere in the distance, the sound of helicopters still searching for prey that had already slipped the trap. The road ahead was long, unknown. Probably ended in courtrooms or graveyards or some combination of both. But at least it was forward. At least it was motion. At least it was the opposite of surrender. And after 5 years of running from the past, Elena had finally learned that some things were worth running toward. Toronto emerged from the highway haze like a promise written in glass and steel. 3 million people living lives that had nothing to do with Syrian deserts or buried truths or generals who murdered their own soldiers. Elena watched the skyline grow closer and felt the weight of civilization pressing down. Out in the wilderness, the rules were simple. Survive or die, move or be caught. But cities had laws and cameras and the particular kind of scrutiny that made ghosts visible. Hendricks drove with his usual competence, relaxed but alert. The kind of driver who'd spent years conducting surveillance in places where being noticed meant failure. They ditched the truck 20 miles back, switched to a sedan that Sarah had arranged. Clean plates, registration that would hold up to casual inspection. The kind of vehicle that disappeared into traffic. "You should know," Hendricks said. "Tyler's not at Walter Reed anymore." Elena turned to look at him. "What?" "Moved him 6 hours ago. Sarah's contacts say he was transferred to Fort Meade, NSA facility. Total information lockdown. They're isolating him. Worse." Hendricks's jaw tightened. "They're preparing to discredit him. Leaked reports about PTSD, about false memories from prolonged captivity, about Russian brainwashing techniques. By the time we get to The Hague, the narrative will be that your brother is a traumatized victim who can't distinguish reality from manipulation. Can we get him out? Not without starting a war. Fort Meade is hardened facility, multiple security perimeters. Even if we could breach, extraction would require resources we don't have. So we leave him." The words tasted like betrayal, but tactical reality was unforgiving. They had one shot at making this matter. One chance to put truth on international record before Slate's machinery ground them into footnotes. Trying to rescue Tyler would burn that chance and accomplish nothing. He knew the risks, Hendricks said quietly. When he called me, when he gave you that coded message, he was telling you to go forward, to finish the mission even if it meant leaving him behind. Doesn't make it easier. No, but it makes it necessary. They drove in silence. Traffic thickened as they approached the city center. Rush hour in a place where rush hour meant too many people going to jobs that paid bills and promised futures. Normal people, living normal lives. Elena wondered what that felt like, whether she'd ever get the chance to find out. The safe house was in Scarborough, eastern suburb, dense, multicultural, the kind of neighborhood where strangers were common enough that one more didn't register. Sarah had rented it through a shell corporation that traced back to a consulting firm that existed only on paper, the tradecraft of people who'd spent careers staying invisible. Volkov's vehicles were already there, parked in a garage that had been modified to hide them from satellite observation. His men were inside. Jameson was on a couch, looking better. Color returning to his face, the resilience of someone who'd survived worse and refused to accept that age meant weakness. Captain Mora. Volkov stood when she entered. Sheriff Hendricks, welcome to our temporary headquarters. We have 4 hours before the charter flight. I suggest we use them productively. Sarah emerged from a back room, laptop under one arm, tablet in the other, the permanent look of someone processing too much information through too little sleep. She'd been working, the kind of obsessive focus that came from knowing the window for success was measured in hours. We have developments, Sarah said, not all good. She set the laptop on the table. Open files. The screen showed what looked like internal Pentagon communications, classified headers, distribution lists that included names Elena recognized, chiefs of staff, intelligence directors, people with enough authority to move nations. This was sent 6 hours ago. Sarah pointed to a message from General Slate's office to JSOC Command. Orders to activate a crisis response team. Immediate deployment to The Hague. Official cover story is providing security for American observers at the ICC proceedings. They're sending a kill team to Europe, Hendricks said. Not just a team. Sarah scrolled through more documents. Slate's mobilizing everything. CIA assets, military contractors, even reached out to allied intelligence services. Told them there's a Russian disinformation campaign targeting American credibility. That any testimony from Alexei Volkov should be treated as hostile propaganda. So even if we testify, no one will believe us. Elena felt the walls closing, every angle covered, every exit blocked. Slate hadn't survived 4 decades in uniform by leaving loose ends. It's worse than that, Volkov's voice was grim. He crossed to the window, pulled the curtain aside just enough to see the street. I have sources in Russian intelligence, old colleagues who owe me favors. They say Moscow has disavowed me, officially declared me a rogue agent, which means I have no protection. No diplomatic immunity. If I'm killed on foreign soil, my government will call it justice. They've cut you loose. They were always going to cut me loose, but I expected it to happen after The Hague, not before, Mavon. Someone convinced Moscow that I'm more liability than asset, someone with enough influence to make the Kremlin abandon a 30-year intelligence officer. Slate, Elena said. Volkov nodded. Marcus Slate has been playing this game since before you were born. He knows how to manipulate enemies into doing his work. Probably told Moscow that letting me testify would expose Russian operations in Syria, that protecting me would cost them more than sacrificing me, and Moscow, being pragmatic, made the logical choice. So you're alone. We're all alone, Volkov let the curtain fall, turned to face the room. No governments backing us, no agencies providing support, just a handful of people against the most powerful military establishment in the world. The smart move would be to disappear, find a beach somewhere, live whatever life remains to us. But we're not going to do that, Jameson's voice cut through the room, strong despite the bandages and bruises, because the smart move is what they're counting on. They've spent careers studying human psychology, understanding how people react to overwhelming force. They expect us to calculate odds and choose survival over principle. And sometimes, Elena added, doing what they don't expect is the only weapon left. Sarah pulled up new files. These are the ICC preliminary hearing transcripts. Volkov is scheduled to testify in 36 hours. The court has approved witness statements from myself and Colonel Jameson as supporting evidence. They've also agreed to hear from Elena Mora, contingent on her arrival at The Hague. What about Tyler? Sarah's expression darkened. The court requested his testimony. State Department blocked it, claimed he's receiving medical treatment and can't travel. Filed documentation supporting diagnosis of severe PTSD with dissociative episodes. Basically argued he's mentally incompetent to testify. They're systematically eliminating every witness. Hendricks stood, began pacing, the restless energy of someone whose body needed action. First the cover-up in Syria, then keeping Tyler prisoner, now discrediting him publicly. How far does this go? How many people are complicit? That, Volkov said, is the question that terrifies them, because the answer suggests rot that goes beyond one general, beyond one operation. We're looking at institutional corruption, at a system designed to protect itself regardless of truth. The room fell silent. Outside, Toronto continued its ordinary business. Cars passing, people walking, the mundane machinery of a society that believed in laws and justice, and the fundamental idea that power had limits. Elena moved to the table, studied the documents Sarah had compiled. Years of investigation compressed into files and photographs in testimony that painted a picture of systematic deception. The black site in Syria, the chemical weapons testing, the decision to eliminate witnesses, all of it documented, all of it damning, and all of it worthless if they couldn't survive long enough to present it. We need insurance, she said. Something that guarantees the evidence gets out even if we don't make it to The Hague. I've arranged that. Sarah pulled a flash drive from her pocket. This contains everything, every file, every witness statement, every piece of evidence. It's encrypted with a dead man's switch. If I don't check in every 12 hours, the encryption breaks and the files get sent to 40 different news outlets. Major papers, independent journalists, people who will publish regardless of pressure. How many people know about this? Just us and one journalist, someone I trust, former colleague from my agency days. He's aware there's a story coming. Doesn't know the details yet, but he's ready to run with it the moment he gets confirmation. Volkov smiled, cold but appreciative. You've been planning this for a long time. 3 years, since the day I got James's real autopsy report, since I understood that the system wouldn't investigate itself. That justice required forcing their hand. The next hours moved with the compressed urgency of final preparations. Volkov's men checked weapons, verified travel documents, ran counter-surveillance sweeps to confirm they hadn't been followed. Sarah coordinated with her contacts, confirmed the charter flight was still scheduled, still clean, still the best chance they had. Hendricks pulled Elena aside, near the garage where their escape vehicles waited, his expression serious, hard. I'm not coming with you, he said. Elena felt something twist in her chest. Tom, someone needs to stay. Someone needs to be ready to act if this goes sideways. I've got contacts stateside, people who owe me. If you don't make it to The Hague, I can still push the story. Create enough noise that burying it becomes impossible. You're staying behind to be our failsafe. I'm staying behind because this leg. Hendricks gestured to the prosthetic. It's good for driving, good for shooting, but running through airports and dodging international hit squads, I'd slow you down, get you killed. Better I stay where I can actually help. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that he'd already done more than friendship required, that he'd saved her life and earned the right to walk away clean. But she understood the math, understood that sometimes the best way to help was to accept your limitations and work within them. Thank you, she said, for everything. Thank you for giving me something worth fighting for. Hendricks extended his hand. 5 years I've been going through motions. Pretending Millbrook was enough. That being sheriff of a dying town was somehow meaningful. This matters. This is the kind of mission that reminds you why you put on the uniform in the first place. They shook, the grip of soldiers who understood that some goodbyes were permanent. 90 minutes before the flight, Sarah's encrypted phone buzzed. She answered, listened. Her face went carefully neutral, the kind of blank that came from years of receiving bad news in rooms where showing emotion meant weakness. She hung up, looked at the group. Tyler's being moved, she said. My contact at Fort Meade says there's unusual activity. Multiple vehicles, security protocols that don't match standard patient transfer. They're taking him somewhere. Where? Elena was already on her feet. Unknown. But the timing is suspicious. Sarah pulled up satellite imagery, real-time feeds from sources that shouldn't exist but did if you knew the right people. 3 SUVs left Fort Meade 23 minutes ago, heading south. Current location puts them near Baltimore. That's the opposite direction from any military medical facility. Jameson studied the map. There's nothing down there except industrial zones in the port. Elena felt ice in her veins. They're not transferring him for medical care. They're moving him to kill him, somewhere isolated, somewhere they can make it look like an accident or an escape attempt gone wrong. Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard. Accessing traffic cameras, running vehicle recognition software, the kind of surveillance that governments claim didn't exist but used every day. After 2 minutes, she had coordinates. Port Covington, industrial area. The convoy stopped at a warehouse complex. She zoomed the satellite image. 3 buildings, largely abandoned, perfect location if you want privacy. How far? Elena was already loading weapons, checking ammunition, the automatic preparation for violence. 40 minutes if we drive fast, Sarah met her eyes. But Elena, this is obviously a trap. They know we're monitoring. Know we'd see the transfer. They're baiting you. I know. Elena's voice was flat. Dead certain. And I'm going anyway. Volkov stepped forward. Captain, we have 75 minutes before the charter flight. If we miss it, we miss our window. The next available flight is 2 days. By then, Slate will have every airport locked down. Tyler is my brother, and he's one man against the mission. Volkov's expression held something between respect and frustration. I understand family loyalty, but we're not soldiers anymore. We're witnesses, and witnesses have one job: survive long enough to testify. Elena looked at him, at Sarah, at Jameson struggling to stand despite the pain, at the mission they'd built from sacrifice and determination, and the stubborn belief that truth still mattered. Then she looked at Hendricks, at the man who'd risked everything to pull her from one trap already, who understood that sometimes the mission was exactly as important as the person you were trying to save. I'm going after him, she said. You get on that plane, get to The Hague, present the evidence. I'll find Tyler, keep him safe, join you when I can. You won't make it in time. Then you testify without me. But I'm not leaving him again. Jameson stood, moved with the careful deliberation of someone whose body was held together by willpower and pain medication. If the captain's going after her brother, she's not going alone. Colonel, Volkov's tone carried warning, you can barely walk. I can shoot, I can think, and I can provide one more gun between Tyler Mora and the people hunting him. That's enough. Sarah closed her laptop, stood. I'm staying too. I know the area, have contacts with Maryland law enforcement, can access databases and surveillance feeds. You'll need intelligence support. This is insane, Volkov looked at each of them. You're throwing away our chance, our one opportunity to make this public. Number. Elena checked her weapons, verified the 6 Sauer was loaded, chamber round, safety off. We're ensuring the mission continues regardless of outcome. You get to The Hague, testify, make enough noise that the story can't be buried. We'll buy you time, keep Slate's attention divided, and maybe, if we're lucky, we'll survive to join you. And if you're not lucky, then Hendricks activates the dead man's switch. Files go public. Evidence gets released. The truth comes out even if we're not alive to see it. Volkov stared at her, then slowly nodded. You are either the bravest woman I've ever met or the most foolish. Perhaps both. He extended his hand. It has been an honor, Captain Mora, even if we disagree on tactics. They shook. 2 soldiers from opposite sides of wars that had shaped them into weapons, finding common ground in the pursuit of something larger than national interests. One of Volkov's men approached, spoke in rapid Russian. Volkov's expression hardened. He turned to the group. Update. Baltimore police scanner reports a possible hostage situation at Port Covington. Anonymous tip. Officers responding, but holding perimeter pending federal involvement. They're creating cover, Sarah said, making it look official. By the time local PD realizes it's black ops, the scene will be sanitized. How long do we have? Elena asked. 20 minutes before FBI arrives and locks down the area. After that, getting in becomes exponentially harder. Then we move now. They loaded into vehicles. Volkov's convoy heading for the airport. Elena's team heading south. Back across the border. Back into American jurisdiction. Back into the kill zone that had been prepared with the kind of meticulous planning that came from unlimited resources and institutional authority. Hendricks drove, fast but controlled, the kind of speed that suggested urgency without attracting police attention. Beside him, Elena checked weapons, loaded magazines, ran through mental preparation that turned fear into focus. In the back seat, Jameson was on his phone, calling in favors, reaching out to old contacts who still owed him. Men who'd served together in wars that had different names but similar costs. Within 15 minutes, he'd assembled something resembling support, not backup, not reinforcements, just people willing to provide intelligence and possibly extraction if things went completely sideways. Sarah navigated, pulling up satellite imagery, identifying approach routes and escape vectors, the planning that happened before violence, the calculations that separated survivors from casualties. They crossed back into the United States at Niagara. Tourist crossing, heavy traffic, border guards who looked at documents and waved them through without extensive questioning. Just another carload of Canadians heading to shop in American outlets. The irony wasn't lost on Elena, slipping back into her own country like an infiltrator, hunted by the military she'd served. Declared enemy of the state that had given her citizenship and purpose, and then asked her to die quietly when the truth became inconvenient. Baltimore appeared through twilight haze, city of monuments and crime, and the particular American optimism that said tomorrow would be better despite all evidence suggesting otherwise. They drove through neighborhoods that had seen better days, past row houses and corner stores and churches that promised salvation to people who mostly just wanted survival. Port Covington sat at the edge of things, industrial zone being slowly converted to condos and restaurants. The kind of development that spoke of money and vision and displacement, but large sections remained unconverted. Warehouses, shipping containers, spaces where bodies could be dumped and not found for days. Sarah's contact sent updated coordinates. The convoy had stopped at a specific warehouse. Thermal imaging showed multiple heat signatures. At least 8 people inside, maybe more. It's definitely occupied, Sarah said. Question is whether Tyler's actually there, or if this is pure misdirection. Only one way to find out. Elena chambered around. We go in, we search, we extract if he's there, and if it's a trap, we make them pay for it. They parked 4 blocks from the target warehouse, approached on foot, using darkness and urban terrain for concealment. Elena moved point, Sarah and Jameson followed, spacing themselves, maintaining situational awareness. The muscle memory of people who'd done this in places where mistakes were permanent. The warehouse district was quiet. Too quiet. No traffic, no workers, no homeless people who usually occupied these spaces. The absence was telling. Someone had cleared the area, which meant someone knew they were coming. Elena signaled halt. The team took cover behind a shipping container. She pulled out binoculars, scanned the target warehouse. Movement on the roof, 2 figures. Difficult to make out details in the fading light, but their postures screamed tactical, professional. The kind of operators who wouldn't be there unless something important was happening inside. We're expected, she whispered. Good. Jameson checked his rifle. I'd hate to think we drove all this way for nothing. Sarah pulled up building schematics on her tablet. 3 entry points, main loading dock, side personnel door, roof access via external ladder, all visible from overwatch positions. So we make our own door. Elena studied the building. Walls were corrugated metal, old, probably degraded. A shaped charge could breach quietly, create entry where they weren't watching. You have shaped charges? Sarah asked. No, but I have creativity and a general disregard for OSHA regulations. Elena pointed to a propane tank near the warehouse. Industrial size, probably for forklifts. We shoot that. The explosion creates distraction and potential breach point. That'll announce our presence. They already know we're here. Might as well make an entrance they remember. Elena positioned herself 200 meters from the tank, comfortable range, minimal wind. She settled into shooting position. Breathing slowed. Heart rate dropped. The world narrowed to the space visible through her scope. She fired. The tank erupted. Not the Hollywood fireball, but a sustained explosion that tore through metal and created pressure waves that shattered nearby windows. The side wall of the warehouse buckled, bent inward, created a gap large enough to move through. Move! Elena was already running, Sarah and Jameson behind her. They covered the distance in seconds, entered through the breach into darkness and dust and the chemical smell of burning metal. Inside, the warehouse was vast, empty except for scattered debris and the particular desolation of abandoned industrial space, but not entirely empty. Elena's eyes adjusted, shapes became visible. Equipment, medical, IV stands, monitors, And in the center, strapped to a gurney, was Tyler, her brother, alive, unconscious but breathing, hooked to machines that beeped with mechanical indifference. Elena ran to him, checked vitals, pulse steady, respiration normal. He'd been sedated, kept under for transport or interrogation or whatever purpose Slate's people had planned. We need to move him. Sarah was already disconnecting tubes, shutting down monitors. The practiced efficiency of someone who'd conducted extractions before. Cover the exits. Elena lifted Tyler, lighter than he should be. 5 years of captivity followed by weeks of hospitalization had wasted muscle. But he was alive, that was enough. Jameson positioned near the breach. Rifle ready, scanning for threats. Behind them, footsteps. Multiple contacts, moving with tactical precision. Contact rear. Jameson fired. Controlled bursts, buying seconds. Elena carried Tyler toward the loading dock. Sarah ahead, clearing corners. The warehouse exploded with gunfire. Rounds sparked off metal, ricocheted with angry whines. The air filled with cordite and concrete dust. They made the loading dock. Outside, vehicles waiting, not theirs. Black SUVs, government plates. Doors opening, figures emerging. Federal agents, DEA markings, but wrong posture, wrong equipment. These weren't drug enforcement. These were tactical operators wearing DEA credentials as cover. The lead agent raised a megaphone. This is a federal operation. You are interfering with a lawful detention. Put down your weapons and surrender the subject. The subject has a name. Elena's voice carried across the space. Sergeant Tyler Mora, American soldier, prisoner of war for 5 years. And you're not taking him anywhere. Ma'am, you're making this harder than it needs to be. Good. Hard is what you deserve. The agent sighed, gestured to his team. They moved forward, professional, patient, willing to wait out a standoff because time favored numbers. Behind Elena, an engine roared. Sanuman. She turned, Hendricks in a truck, different vehicle. How he got in there was mystery, but the timing was perfect. Get in, he shouted. They loaded Tyler into the truck bed. Sarah climbed in beside him. Jameson provided covering fire while Elena mounted up. Hendricks hit the accelerator. The truck surged forward. The agents opened fire. Rounds punched through the tailgate, through the cab. One passed close enough to Elena's head that she felt the pressure wave. But they were moving, escaping, the distance opening. 2 blocks, 4 blocks, 8 blocks. Behind them, vehicles in pursuit, lights, sirens. The full weight of federal law enforcement mobilized to stop 4 people who knew too much. Airport, Hendricks said. Volkov's plane, it's our only shot. That's 90 miles. We'll never make it with this tail. Then we lose the tail. He turned hard, into an industrial park, through loading areas, between buildings, the truck's suspension screaming. Behind them, the pursuit vehicles struggled to maintain formation. Too large, too heavy, built for intimidation rather than agility. Hendricks drove like a man possessed, using every trick learned from years of surveillance and counter-surveillance. They lost one pursuit vehicle when it tried to follow through a gap too narrow for its width. Lost another when Hendricks timed a traffic light perfectly. But more vehicles appeared, joining the chase. Coordinated response. Someone was tracking them. Probably satellite. Probably multiple feeds. The kind of resources that only federal agencies possessed. We're not going to make it, Sarah said. Even if we reach the airport, they'll lock it down. Ground every plane. Jameson was on his phone, making calls, his voice calm despite the chaos, calling in every favor he'd accumulated over 40 years in uniform, reaching out to men who remembered when honor meant something, when orders could be questioned if they violated fundamental principles. After 5 minutes, he hung up, turned to the group. I've arranged extraction, not Toronto, too far, but there's a private airstrip outside Dover. Charter pilot owes me. He'll fly us to Iceland. From there, commercial to Amsterdam. That's still 60 miles. Then we drive 60 miles. Jameson's smile was fierce. We've come this far. I'll be damned if we quit now. They drove through Maryland darkness, pursued by forces that had authorization and resources and the institutional weight of the most powerful government on earth. Drove toward an airstrip that might be compromised, toward a pilot who might sell them out, toward a future that looked like either testimony or graves. But they drove, because Tyler was alive, because truth still mattered, because some fights were worth losing everything to win. Tyler stirred in the truck bed, consciousness returning in fragments. His eyes opened, confused, disoriented, then focusing on Elena's face. "Sis?" His voice was rough. "Damaged. Is this real?" "It's real. We're getting you out. You're safe now." Tyler's hand found hers, squeezed with what little strength he had. The gesture of a brother who'd survived 5 years of hell and was finally, impossibly, going home. And behind them, Baltimore burned with red and blue lights, the machinery of state power grinding forward. Relentless, inevitable, but not quite fast enough to catch 4 soldiers and a sheriff who'd learned long ago that impossible odds just meant you had to try harder. The airstrip waited somewhere ahead, and beyond that, Iceland, Amsterdam, The Hague, the places where truth would finally have its day in court, if they could just survive the next 60 miles. The airstrip appeared through morning fog like something from another era. Single runway, corrugated hangar, the kind of facility that existed in the margins between commercial aviation and private operation. A place where questions weren't asked as long as fuel was paid for in cash. The charter plane sat waiting. Twin-engine Cessna, old but maintained. The kind of aircraft that could land on rough strips in countries that barely acknowledged air traffic control. Inside, the pilot was running pre-flight checks. 60 years old, former Air Force. One of the men Jameson had called. One of the brothers who remembered when service meant something more than career advancement. They loaded Tyler into the cabin, still weak but conscious now. The sedation wearing off enough that he could sit upright, could process where he was and what was happening. Sarah had checked his vitals every 10 minutes during the drive. Pulse stable, no signs of distress, just pharmaceutical fog lifting to reveal a mind that had survived 5 years of captivity intact. Elena sat beside her brother, held his hand, the same hand that had thrown baseballs in refugee camps, the same hand that had signed enlistment papers, the same hand she'd thought was buried in Arlington. 5 years of believing a lie. 5 years of carrying guilt for a death that hadn't happened. And now here he was, real, solid, proof that sometimes the impossible was just truth waiting to be discovered. The pilot climbed aboard. Name patch said Morrison, face weathered by time and sun, and the particular aging that came from flying into places where getting shot at was an occupational hazard. "Colonel Jameson vouches for you," he said to Elena. "That's good enough for me. We're fueled for Iceland. 8 hours flight time. I filed a flight plan for weather research. Academic survey? The kind of boring paperwork that doesn't attract attention." "What about pursuit?" Sarah asked. "Already handled." Morrison gestured toward the hangar. 3 other aircraft taking off in the next 20 minutes. Different directions, different altitudes. Friends of mine creating radar clutter. Make tracking any single plane more difficult. Jameson pulled himself into the cabin, moving carefully, pain evident in every motion, but his eyes were clear, focused, the determination of someone who'd decided that dying was acceptable if it happened after the mission. Hendricks stood at the aircraft door, looking in, not coming aboard. He'd made his choice. Would stay behind, be the failsafe, the one who could activate Sarah's dead man's switch if everything went wrong. "You sure about this?" Elena asked. Hendricks smiled, that broken grin that held more sadness than joy. "Someone needs to stay behind and make sure your story gets told. Someone needs to be ready to raise hell if Slate tries to bury this. And someone needs to explain to the good people of Millbrook why their librarian disappeared in the middle of the night. Tell them I'm sorry. Tell them I tried to be normal. Tell them yourself, when you come back." Hendricks extended his hand. "And you will come back, because you're too stubborn to let bastards like Slate win." They shook, the grip of soldiers who'd fought together, who'd bled together, who understood that some bonds transcended friendship and entered the territory of brotherhood. Hendricks stepped back. The door closed. The engine spooled up. Morrison taxied to the runway. No tower clearance, no official authorization. Just an old pilot and his aircraft heading into sky that belonged to everyone and no one. The Cessna lifted, banking east, climbing through cloud cover that hid them from ground observation. Below, Maryland fell away, then the Chesapeake, then the Atlantic coastline where America ended and the ocean began. Elena watched through the window, her country disappearing behind weather and distance, the nation that had given her citizenship and purpose, the military that had trained her to be exceptional, the system that had asked her to die quietly when the truth became inconvenient. She didn't know if she'd see it again, didn't know if testifying at The Hague would mean exile, treason charges, a future spent running from extradition requests and assassination attempts. But she knew that going back without trying would mean living with a different kind of death, the slow erosion of self-respect that came from choosing safety over honor. Morrison's voice crackled over the intercom. Heads up, we've got company. 2 aircraft, fast movers, military, coming up on our 6. Elena moved to the cockpit, scanned the sky, 2 dots growing larger. Military aircraft, F-16As based on the profile. Interceptors launched from some base with orders to stop a civilian aircraft from leaving American airspace. How close are we to international waters, she asked. 20 miles, Morrison's hands were steady on the controls. Maybe 15 minutes at our current speed. They're closing fast. They'll be on us in 3 minutes. Options? Limited. They're faster, better armed. If they want us down, they can force us down. Question is whether they're authorized to use weapons. What do you think? Morrison was quiet for a moment, thinking, calculating. I think they're under orders to stop us, but I also think someone's worried about optics. Shooting down a civilian aircraft in peacetime, even over American waters? That's an international incident. Questions from allies, media coverage, the kind of attention Slate can't afford. So they'll try intimidation first. That's my guess. And if we can stall long enough to reach international waters, their jurisdiction becomes questionable. Not impossible, but questionable enough that forcing us down becomes a political decision rather than a military one. The F-16S closed, drew alongside, close enough that Elena could see the pilots, could see them gesturing, pointing down, the universal signal for land immediately. One of them waggled his wings, the aerial equivalent of a warning shot. Morrison keyed his radio, addressed the fighters on guard frequency. This is civilian aircraft, November 7-3. 2 Charlie, we are on filed flight plan, weather research mission. What is the nature of this intercept? The response came sharp, clipped. Military precision with an edge of frustration. November 7-3-2. Charlie, you are ordered to return to United States airspace immediately. Divert to Andrews Air Force Base. Acknowledge. Morrison looked at Jameson. Your call, Colonel. We can comply, land at Andrews, face whatever reception committee is waiting. Or we can push through, see if they're willing to escalate. Jameson's expression was stone, but his voice carried steel that had been forged over 4 decades of making hard calls. How far to international waters? 12 miles, 11 minutes. Can we make it? Morrison studied his instruments, his fuel, his options. If they don't force us down, if they're under rules of engagement that prioritize avoiding an incident, maybe, then we keep flying. Morrison nodded, keyed the radio again. His voice was calm, professional, the tone of someone who'd faced down worse threats than fighter jets. Negative military flight. We are civilian aircraft in legal airspace. We have committed no violation. We are proceeding to our filed destination. November 7-3-2, Charlie, you are carrying fugitives wanted for federal crimes. Return to American airspace or we will be forced to take action. Define action. Morrison's response was almost conversational. Because unless you're authorized to shoot down an unarmed civilian aircraft, your options are limited. Silence. Long enough that Elena could hear her own heartbeat, could feel Tyler's hand gripping hers, could sense Jameson and Sarah holding their breath. Then the F-16s moved, not backing off, getting closer. Formation flying that put them within feet of the Cessna's wingtips. The kind of aggressive positioning designed to intimidate, to force the pilot to flinch, to make continuing forward feel more dangerous than turning back. Morrison held course, steady, his hands on the controls showing no tremor, no hesitation, just the absolute focus of someone who'd flown through worse turbulence than fighter jets could create. 10 miles to international waters. The F-16 Cyan stayed close, matching speed, matching altitude, creating a cage of metal and threat. One wrong move, one moment of panic, and collision would send everyone into the ocean. 8 miles, November 7-3-2. Charlie, final warning, return to American airspace. Negative. Morrison's voice remained calm. We are minutes from international waters. Your jurisdiction ends there. Suggest you contact your command and request clarification on rules of engagement. 6 miles. The F-16As pulled up, climbed above the Cessna, then dove, passing close, creating turbulence that rocked the civilian aircraft, the aerial equivalent of shoving, of demonstrating capability without actually opening fire. Tyler gripped the armrest, his knuckles white. 5 years of captivity had taught him to fear the sound of jets. The memory of the drone that had destroyed his team, that had turned fire into weapon. "It's okay." Elena kept her voice steady. "They're trying to scare us. That's all. Just intimidation." 4 miles. The radio crackled again. Different voice this time. Senior. More authority. November 7-3-2. "Charlie, this is Colonel Bradley, Andrews Air Force Base. I am personally ordering you to return to U.S. airspace. Failure to comply will result in your aircraft being designated hostile and treated accordingly." Morrison glanced at Jameson. "That's an escalation. Hostile designation means they can shoot." "How far?" 3 miles, 2 minutes. Jameson leaned toward the radio, keyed the mic himself. "Colonel Bradley, this is Colonel Richard Jameson, United States Marine Corps, retired. I am aboard this aircraft as a witness traveling to testify at the International Criminal Court regarding war crimes committed by American forces in Syria. Forcing us down would constitute obstruction of justice in violation of international law. I strongly suggest you contact the State Department before taking any action you'll regret." Silence, then. "Colonel Jameson, you are wanted for questioning in connection with the same investigation. Your presence on that aircraft does not grant it immunity." "Perhaps not, but it does create complications. Shooting down a decorated Marine Corps colonel who's attempting to testify about American war crimes. The optics alone would be catastrophic, not to mention the international response. I suggest you make a phone call before you do something that ends careers." 2 miles. The F-16ES held a position, neither backing off nor escalating, caught in the liminal space between orders and consequences, between following commands and making decisions that would define the rest of their lives. 1 mile. Morrison checked his navigation, GPS showing the boundary approaching, the invisible line where American jurisdiction ended and international law began, where shooting them down would transform from domestic law enforcement to act of war. "International waters in 30 seconds, he said quietly. The F-16 stayed close, weapons still cold, but presence unmistakable. The message clear. We could have stopped you, chose not to. Remember that. 10 seconds. 5. The GPS beeped. Coordinates shifted. They were in international waters. The F-16 peeled off, banking hard, returning to American airspace, leaving the Cessna alone in sky that now belonged to no nation, and therefore couldn't be controlled by one. Morrison exhaled, long breath that carried the weight of decisions that could have ended differently. "We made it. They're gone." For now, Sarah was already on her laptop, monitoring communications. "They'll notify NATO allies, put pressure on Iceland to deny landing permission, try to make arrival as difficult as takeoff." "Can they do that?" Tyler asked. His voice was stronger now. "The immediate danger passed. Just force another country to arrest us?" "They can try." Jameson settled back into his seat. Whether Iceland complies is another question. They're not in the EU, not beholden to American military pressure the way some allies are, and they have history of providing asylum to whistleblowers. The flight stretched into hours. Tyler began to look more human, color returning, strength rebuilding in small increments. He asked questions about what had happened since his capture, about the evidence, about what would happen when they landed. Jameson answered, patient, thorough, the briefing style of someone who'd prepared thousands of soldiers for operations. Tyler listened, absorbed, asked clarifying questions that showed tactical thinking. Even broken by 5 years of captivity, he was still a soldier. By hour 4, Sarah received encrypted messages from her contacts, updates that painted a picture of controlled chaos. American diplomatic channels were on fire. Calls to Reykjavik, pressure on Icelandic officials, threats about NATO cooperation and trade relationships. But Iceland was holding firm, not committing to arrest, not denying landing rights, just maintaining neutral position while lawyers argued about jurisdiction and extradition treaties. By hour 6, they crossed into Icelandic airspace. Morrison contacted Keflavik Tower. Filed approach, was cleared to land without incident. Either Iceland had decided to permit entry or hadn't decided to prevent it. Either way, the wheels touched runway without sirens or armed response teams. Customs was different. Officers were professional but thorough. Checked documents, asked questions, made phone calls to superiors who made phone calls to politicians who were trying to decide whether honoring American extradition requests was worth the diplomatic fallout. After 2 hours of bureaucratic limbo, an official arrived, Icelandic Foreign Ministry. She carried herself with the particular authority of someone who spoke for government policy. "You are not under arrest," she said, "but you are also not free to leave. Pending review of your status, you will remain in controlled accommodation." Think of it as protective custody rather than detention. "For how long?" Elena asked. "Until we determine whether your presence here creates obligations under international law, or until you depart for another jurisdiction." The Hague. "We're traveling to testify at the ICC. "Yes, we are aware." The official's expression was carefully neutral. "That testimony is scheduled in 48 hours. You will be permitted to continue to Amsterdam tomorrow. Tonight you stay here." They were taken to a facility that looked more like conference center than detention. Comfortable rooms, food, medical care for Tyler and Jameson. The kind of treatment that suggested Iceland was threading a needle between American pressure and international law. Volkov called on encrypted line. He'd landed in Amsterdam 12 hours earlier, was already coordinating with ICC officials, preparing testimony, making sure that even if Elena and Tyler didn't arrive, the evidence would still be presented. "Your government is applying significant pressure," he said, demanding extradition, claiming terrorism charges. They are very creative in their legal theories. "Will the Hague cave?" Elena asked. "No. The court has jurisdiction, has already accepted our testimony. Forcing witnesses to abandon proceedings would undermine the entire institution. But expect significant security presence. Expect American observers to challenge everything. Expect this to be the fight of your life. We didn't come this far to back down now." "Good. Because the world is watching." Sarah's dead man switch activated 6 hours ago. Every major news outlet has the files. The story's breaking. And now they want to see if witnesses will actually appear, or if American pressure will make them disappear. The next morning, they boarded a commercial flight to Amsterdam, under Icelandic diplomatic escort. The kind of protective detail that said Iceland had chosen its position would ensure witnesses reached their destination despite American objections. The flight was quiet. Tyler slept. Jameson reviewed notes. Sarah coordinated with lawyers. Elena stared out the window and tried to prepare for what was coming. Amsterdam at dusk looked like a painting. Canals reflecting streetlights. Architecture that spoke of centuries and commerce, and a nation built on trade rather than conquest. They landed at Schiphol, cleared customs with ICC credentials, were met by Dutch security. The drive to The Hague was 40 minutes, through countryside that looked nothing like America, through a nation that had survived occupation and rebuilt with determination to make law matter more than power. The ICC headquarters stood modern and imposing. Glass and steel. Architecture designed to suggest transparency and justice. Inside, Volkov waited. He looked tired, older, but something like hope flickered in his expression when he saw them. "You made it." His voice carried genuine surprise. "I had calculated the odds at less than 40%. We're stubborn." Elena helped Tyler from the vehicle. He could walk now, slowly, but walking. The court session is tomorrow. 9 a.m., Volkov led them through security, past guards who checked credentials and weapons, into chambers that looked more like conference rooms than courtrooms. The ICC operated differently than American courts. Less theater, more procedure. The goal was determining truth rather than winning arguments. They were given rooms, secure, monitored. The kind of protection that acknowledged they were witnesses rather than guests. Sarah coordinated with court officials, submitted evidence, verified that files were properly secured and accessible. Jameson met with prosecutors, walked them through the timeline, explained military procedures and chain of command, provided context that turned abstract war crimes into concrete decisions made by specific people. Elena sat with Tyler, in a room that looked out over the city, lights coming on as evening deepened. Somewhere out there, Slate was making moves, calling in favors, applying pressure to judges and officials and anyone who could influence outcomes. The full weight of American diplomatic power being leveraged to ensure testimony never happened or was dismissed as propaganda. "You scared?" Tyler asked. "Terrified." Elena's honesty surprised her, but yeah, terrified. "Good. Fear means you understand the stakes." Tyler looked at his hands, the trembling that hadn't stopped since his escape. "I've been scared for 5 years. Every day, every hour. Scared I'd die in that cell. Scared I'd break and tell them whatever they wanted to hear. Scared that even if I survived, no one would believe me. I believe you. I know, Tyler met her eyes. That's why I can do this. Why I can walk into that courtroom tomorrow and relive the worst night of my life. Because you believed when everyone else said I was dead. They sat in silence, brother and sister, survivors of different traumas that had converged into a single mission. Outside, The Hague continued its evening. People going to dinner, walking buns, living lives that had nothing to do with war crimes and cover-ups and the particular American capacity for violence dressed as virtue. Morning came too fast. Elena had barely slept, just stared at the ceiling and ran through testimony. What she'd say, how she'd say it, the questions that would come, the cross-examination designed to discredit and confuse and turn truth into reasonable doubt. The courtroom was smaller than she expected. No jury box, no dramatic raised bench, just tables and chairs and recording equipment. The judges sat in a panel, 3 of them, international, appointed through processes designed to ensure independence from national interests. The American observer delegation sat stone-faced, taking notes, preparing rebuttals. They had lawyers, experienced, connected. Men who'd made careers defending national security interests in international forums. Volkov testified first. 3 hours of methodical detail, describing the black site, the chemical weapons testing, the joint Russian and American operation that violated every international treaty. His voice was calm, factual, the presentation of someone who'd accepted guilt and was now focused on ensuring others answered for their parts. Sarah testified next, about her husband, about the autopsy report, about 3 years of investigation that had revealed patterns of deception and cover-up. She spoke without visible emotion, just evidence and documentation. But underneath was a grief so deep that words couldn't contain it. Then Jameson. The colonel walked to the witness stand with the bearing of 40 years in uniform, spine straight despite the pain, voice steady despite the stakes. He described Operation Ember 7, the mission parameters, the intelligence, the execution, and then the explosion that had killed 7 men and nearly killed the truth. When they called Tyler, Elena felt her chest tighten. Her brother stood, walked to the stand, sat in a chair that made him look small, young, too fragile to carry the weight of what he'd witnessed. But when he spoke, his voice was strong. He described the night in Syria, the approach to the building, the intelligence gathering, the photographs they'd taken of the black site, the evidence they'd collected, and then the moment when fire bloomed in the darkness and the world became pain and screaming and the knowledge that someone had decided 7 American lives were worth less than protecting a secret. Tyler described the drone, the sound, the vapor trail, the radio call sign he'd heard in the seconds before impact. Everything he'd told Volkov during 5 years of captivity. Everything the Pentagon had tried to bury. The judges listened, asked questions, clarifying, probing, looking for inconsistencies that might suggest coached testimony or false memory. But Tyler's account was consistent, detailed, the kind of precision that came from living with a memory every day for 5 years. The American delegation objected, called Tyler's testimony unreliable, cited studies on memory corruption during captivity, suggested Russian brainwashing, provided expert testimony about the unreliability of traumatized witnesses. But the judges weren't swayed. They'd heard similar arguments before, understood how power tried to discredit truth by attacking the messenger. Then it was Elena's turn. She walked to the stand, sat, looked at the judges. 3 faces that held the power to change everything or nothing. 3 people who would decide whether her testimony mattered. State your name for the record, the presiding judge said. Captain Elena Mora, United States Army, retired. And your role in Operation Ember 7, I was the sniper. I took the shot that killed Dmitry Sokolov. I believed I was eliminating an ISIS commander. I was told the intelligence was solid. I was told the mission would save lives. What do you believe now? Elena paused, chose words carefully. I believe I was used. I believe my shot was the trigger for a cover-up. I believe 7 good men died because someone decided truth was less important than career. The presiding judge leaned forward. Do you have direct knowledge of who ordered the drone strike? Number. Elena met his eyes. I was 800 meters away. I had no communication with command during the mission. But I know the protocols. I know that a Hellfire strike on a building in a combat zone requires theater commander authorization. And I know who the theater commander was. Name him General Marcus Slade, now chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The courtroom erupted. American delegation on their feet, objecting, calling the accusation baseless, demanding the testimony be stricken. The judges called for order, waited for silence, then asked Elena to continue. She described everything: the training, the mission, the shot, the explosion, the aftermath, the 5 years of guilt and grief, the discovery that Tyler was alive, the evidence Volkov had provided, the pattern of cover-up that pointed to someone with enough power to bury truth. When she finished, the presiding judge asked one final question. Captain Mora, why are you here? You could have stayed silent, could have accepted the official story, could have lived quietly. Why risk everything to testify? Elena looked at Tyler, at Jameson, at Sarah, at the faces of people who'd sacrificed everything for a chance at truth. Because 7 men died in that building, 7 brothers who trusted their government to tell the truth about how they died, and their families deserve better than lies. My brother deserved better than being erased, and I deserve to know that my service meant something more than being a tool for murder. The judges conferred, quietly. Then the presiding judge spoke. This court will take the testimony under advisement. We will review all evidence, all documentation, and we will issue findings within 60 days. Thank you, Captain Mora. You are excused. Elena stood, walked from the stand. The American delegation stared with expressions that promised consequences, promised that this wasn't over, that testifying against a 4-star general meant becoming enemy of the state. But Elena had made her choice, had spoken truth in a forum where it couldn't be completely buried. Whatever came next, she'd face it knowing she'd done the one thing that mattered. The session adjourned. Security escorted them from the courthouse. Outside, media had gathered. News crews from around the world, cameras, microphones, the machinery of global attention focusing on a story that had been classified and buried and almost forgotten. Sarah's dead man switch had done its work. The files had gone public. Every document, every photograph, every piece of evidence now available to journalists who specialized in making uncomfortable truths impossible to ignore. Within hours, American news networks were running stories. Former CIA officer alleges cover-up in Syria. Soldier returns from dead to accuse Pentagon of war crimes. Sister of casualty testifies against chairman of Joint Chiefs. The narrative Slate had tried to control was fracturing. Alternative versions spreading faster than official denials could contain. The internet amplified everything, made suppression impossible, created space where truth could compete with power. That evening, they gathered in a safe house outside The Hague. Dutch security, international protection, the kind of temporary immunity that came from being witnesses in an active ICC investigation. Hendricks called on encrypted line, told them about the reaction stateside, about senators demanding investigations, about military officers speaking anonymously to reporters, about families of the 7 dead soldiers filing lawsuits against the Department of Defense. The machinery was turning, slowly, but turning. The kind of momentum that once started became difficult to stop. Tyler sat by a window, looking out at a foreign city, free for the first time in 5 years. But freedom was complicated. He'd never be the same person who'd deployed to Syria. That version of himself had died in the explosion, even if his body had survived. You okay? Elena asked. Tyler shrugged. Define okay. I'm alive. I'm safe. I testified, but I don't know what comes next. Don't know if I can go home. Don't know if home even exists anymore. We'll figure it out, together. He smiled, broken but real. Together. Yeah, I like that. News came 3 days later. General Marcus Slate had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Not an admission of guilt, just a procedural step. But it was movement, acknowledgement that allegations were serious enough to warrant examination. The investigation would take months, maybe years. The Pentagon protected its own, would fight every subpoena, would classify every document, would make the process so difficult that most investigators would give up. But this time was different. This time there were witnesses who testified publicly, evidence that had been released to media, international pressure from a court that didn't answer to American interests. Slate's career was over. Whether he faced criminal charges remained uncertain. But the mythology was shattered. The Golden Boy general who'd modernized warfare was now the man who might have murdered his own soldiers to cover up war crimes. Volkov received his sentence, 15 years, for chemical weapons violations, for war crimes, for the sins he'd admitted and the ones proven through evidence. He accepted it without complaint, told Elena during a final meeting that 15 years in a civilized prison was preferable to the alternatives. And perhaps, he'd said, if enough truth came out, someone would write the history correctly, would note that the black site was joint operation, that both nations were guilty, that soldiers on both sides were victims of decisions made by men who never faced consequences. Jameson returned to Idaho, to his ranch, to whatever peace a man could find after spending his final years ensuring his soldiers' deaths meant something. He moved slowly, pain now permanent, but his eyes carried satisfaction, the look of someone who'd completed his mission. Sarah stayed in Europe, joined an international organization focused on military accountability, turned 3 years of private investigation into professional expertise. She'd never get James back, but she could ensure other families got truth instead of carefully constructed lies. Tyler entered rehabilitation, physical and psychological, the kind of long-term treatment that acknowledged healing wasn't linear, wasn't guaranteed, was just the slow work of rebuilding a life from fragments. Elena remained in The Hague, testified 3 more times as the investigation expanded, provided depositions, answered questions from investigators who were finally asking the right things. She couldn't return to America, not yet. Arrest warrants had been issued, treason charges filed. The government she'd served now called her enemy. But other nations offered asylum. Recognition that sometimes the highest form of patriotism was holding your country accountable. She chose Iceland. Neutral, distant, beautiful in ways that had nothing to do with war. Found work teaching at a university. Languages, cultural studies. The skills she developed as a refugee and soldier applied to helping others understand worlds different from their own. Sometimes she thought about Millbrook, about the library, about Saturday morning story times with children who believed all stories had happy endings. That life was gone, impossible to reclaim. The price of choosing truth. But on clear nights, when the northern lights danced across Arctic sky, Elena would stand outside and feel something like peace. Not happiness, not forgetting. Just the knowledge that she'd done the thing that mattered, had spoken truth when silence would have been safer, had honored 7 brothers who deserved better than being footnotes in classified files. Tyler visited when he could, still fragile, still healing, but alive, real. Proof that some ghosts were just people waiting to be found. They would walk together, brother and sister, survivors of different wars that had converged into a single mission, and they would talk about the future, about building lives that weren't defined by trauma, about finding purpose beyond survival. The investigation continued, slow, bureaucratic, the kind of process that measured progress in years rather than weeks. But progress nonetheless. Officers were questioned, documents were declassified. The official story about Operation Ember 7 began to crack. Families of the 7 dead soldiers received new information, real information, about how their sons and husbands and brothers had died, about the mission they'd been on, about the evidence they'd gathered that had made them targets. Some families sued, others demanded congressional hearings. A few just wanted acknowledgement, wanted the government to admit that their loved ones hadn't died in a training accident, but had been murdered to protect careers. The memorials were updated. 7 names that had been accompanied by lies now carried truth. Not complete truth, not yet, but honest enough that families could grieve properly. Hendricks remained in Millbrook, kept his job as sheriff, kept Elena's apartment maintained, kept the possibility alive that someday she could return. He understood exile, understood that some missions ended in places far from where they started. Years passed. The world moved on. New wars, new scandals, new crises that demanded attention. But the story didn't disappear. Became case study in military academies. Example of what happened when institutional loyalty exceeded moral obligation. And in The Hague, at the ICC, the investigation concluded. Findings were published. 600 pages documenting everything. The black site, the chemical testing, the joint Russian-American operation, the decision to eliminate witnesses, the drone strike, the cover-up. General Marcus Slate was named, specifically, as the officer who authorized the strike. Who knew American soldiers were in the building? Who decided their deaths were acceptable cost for protecting classified programs? He was never charged, never arrested, retired quietly, pension intact, benefits secured. The system protected him even as it acknowledged his guilt. Because that's what systems did. Protected themselves first and sought justice only when convenient. But his legacy was destroyed. Name became synonym for institutional corruption, for the particular American capacity to sacrifice ideals for expedience. Future officers would study his case, would learn what happened when ambition exceeded honor. It wasn't the justice Elena had hoped for, wasn't the dramatic conclusion where villains faced consequences and heroes were vindicated. Real life rarely provided that satisfaction, but it was something. Truth on record, families with answers, a brother restored, and the knowledge that speaking up had mattered, had changed the narrative even if it couldn't change the outcome completely. On the 5th anniversary of her testimony, Elena received a letter, hand-delivered to her university office. No return address. But the handwriting was familiar. Inside, just a few lines from Jameson. Captain, the mission is complete. 7 brothers can rest knowing truth survived them. Your service honored them. Thank you. Semper Fi. Elena folded the letter, put it in a drawer with other mementos from a life that felt both distant and immediate. Dog tags, photographs, the small collection of items that proved she'd been someone else once. That evening, she walked to the coast, watched the Atlantic crash against volcanic rock, the same ocean that separated her from home, the same water that had carried her to testimony and exile and whatever future waited. Tyler joined her, walking better now, stronger, the years of healing showing in posture and presence. He stood beside his sister and they watched the sunset paint the sky in colors that had no names. Was it worth it, he asked? Everything we gave up, everything we lost. Elena thought about the question, about Millbrook, about normal life, about the price of choosing truth over silence. Yeah, she said finally, it was worth it, because 7 brothers deserve to be remembered honestly, because you deserve to be alive, because some things matter more than safety. Even if we can't go home, home isn't a place. Elena took his hand. It's people. It's purpose. It's knowing you did the thing that mattered when it counted. They stood together, watching light fade from sky, watching stars emerge, the same stars that shone over Syria, over Maryland, over Montana, over every battlefield and refuge in place where people tried to make meaning from chaos. Somewhere in America, families visited graves that now carried truth. Somewhere in a European prison, Volkov counted days that were preferable to alternatives. Somewhere in Idaho, Jameson watched sunset from a ranch porch and felt the satisfaction of missions completed. And somewhere in the machinery of government, the next crisis was already brewing. The next cover-up being planned. The next soldier being asked to trust that the mission was righteous and the men giving orders had honor. But this time there would be a story, a precedent, a reminder that truth could compete with power if someone was brave enough to speak it, that 7 names on a memorial mattered more than careers, that some wars were worth fighting even when winning looked like losing. Elena squeezed Tyler's hand. Tomorrow she would teach classes, would help students understand that language was bridge between worlds, would live the ordinary life she'd built from the ashes of the extraordinary one. But tonight, under Icelandic stars, she was still a soldier, still a sister, still someone who'd chosen the hard right over the easy wrong. And that finally was enough. The last good war wasn't the one they'd fought in Syria, wasn't in Afghanistan or Iraq or any other desert where American blood soaked foreign sand. The last good war was the one fought against lies, against corruption, against the idea that some truths were too dangerous to speak. It was the war they'd won by surviving, by testifying, by refusing to let 7 brothers be forgotten. And though the cost had been everything they'd known and most of what they'd loved, they'd paid it, together, the way soldiers always had when the mission mattered more than the price. The ocean kept crashing, the stars kept shining, and somewhere in the distance, the world kept turning, indifferent to individual struggles, uncaring about personal costs. But Elena and Tyler had their truth, had each other, had the knowledge that when history finally sorted through the classified files and buried testimony, their names would be there. Not as traitors, not as victims, but as witnesses who'd spoken when silence would have been safer. And in the end, that was the only victory that mattered. I spent 3 months researching classified military operations and whistleblower cases to bring you Elena's story. What hit me hardest? Discovering how many real soldiers face the exact same choice: stay silent and keep their benefits, or speak truth and lose everything. To everyone who served, did you ever suspect a mission wasn't what they told you it was? And to those who didn't, would you have the courage Elena showed? Drop your thoughts below. Your perspective might be the next story I tell. And if this one resonated, there's more coming. Subscribe so you don't miss it.